Please therefore remember that this meeting can be watched anywhere at any time with anyone who has internet access. There is a delay between the meeting and the broadcast of approximately 30 seconds. Webcasting officer, please can you commence the broadcast and confirm that the broadcast has commenced?
I can confirm that's commenced.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee on the 23rd June 2020. Before we commence the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings, and for ease of reference, these are as follows. Please only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know if you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce the speakers in the order which the request to speak has been made, unless there is a point of order in which we will give way to that member. Please minimise all distractions while you're in the meeting. Members are asked to mute their microphones when they're not speaking and to consider turning off your video to reduce any interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind that there can be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you, so please bear this in mind. Presentation images, video footage should have been made available to you in advance of this meeting and will be made available as part of the presentations this evening. Please indicate via the chat function if you do have any problems. When referring to officers' reports, please quote the page number and paragraph number for ease of reference so your colleagues can follow you. There is no private business for tonight's agenda. However, please can I remind you that should we deal with private business, it is your responsibility to make sure that your venue and connection is private. If you lose connection at any point to this meeting and unable to rejoin, please call the meeting facilitator and we have provided you with the contact details for that. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or to make a point of order. The chat function is subject to the Access to Information rules, regimes such as Free Information, EIR, but is also subject to data protection, rules of defamations and the Council's Code of Conduct. To assist with managing this meeting this evening, the chat function will have the agenda number inserted into it so members can see what item they are due to speak on or wish to speak on. I can confirm that this meeting is quorate. We have officers in attendance as well as the members, but I can confirm that the members of this committee are Councillor James Abbott, Councillor Kevin Bowers, Councillor Tom Cunningham, Councillor Patrick Horner, Councillor Hilton Johnson, Councillor David Mann, Councillor Andy Mundy, Councillor Iona Parker, Councillor Frankie Ritchie, Councillor Wenda Scattergood, Councillor Gabrielle Spray, Councillor Nick Unsworth, Councillor Justine Wrench. In attendance, we have 3 planning officers. We have Chris Padgey, Planning Development Manager, Neil Jones, Principal Planner, Matthew Wild, Senior Planner. We have Alison Webb, who's the Governance and Members Officer. She will be clerking this meeting this evening and will also be reading the submitted statements for public question time. The meeting facilitators for this meeting is myself, Emma Wisby, and we have Jessica Mann. Chairman, they are all the housekeeping matters for this meeting. I now hand the meeting over to you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of our Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Wendy Scattergood, and I'm chairing the meeting this evening. As you know, the Council is still quite new to virtual meetings. Although this is our 5th planning meeting, I would still ask everyone to be patient and understanding as we feel our way through the working. I'm being assisted by governance officers, a meeting facility, who will help me identify when people wish to speak and manage notifications through the chat function. I obviously can't see you all, so please let me know using the chat function. If there are any issues with your internet connections, silence will be taken as I said during this meeting. To start the business, I come to item 1, apologies of absence. All members are present, so we have no apologies for absence. Item 2, direct declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening. I would like to make a general declaration as I'm a member of the Facebook group Better Braintree Together, which has been formed by local residents, and its content has a strong onus on planning matters. So for absolute transparency, I would like to make that declaration, but also specifically to Madam Chairman, item 5A, Restoring High Primary School, Coggeshall, because other members of that Facebook page have tried to engage directly with some members of this planning committee. I have not personally engaged or expressed any comment on that planning application, so we'll stay in the meeting, participate in the debate and vote. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Monday.
I have a substantive NPI for Part A, Application D. As a member of House to Town Council, I also know the H4C committee members, and I have been a strong supporter for the community centre over the years I've been mayor and vice mayor. And at this point, for transparency's sake, I will leave the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to declare an NPI in item 5E, land rear of Tay Road, Earls Cone. Members of the Tay Road Action Group are known to me, but I will remain and vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Unsworth.
Yes, I'd like to declare the fact that I visited the site for Part 5, Part A and B, to understand the difficulties they're facing and discuss the application. At no point did I tell them which way I was voting, but I really wanted to just see the site and understand the difficulties they're facing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could I also declare that just in general, as per Councillor Cunningham, I am to a member of the Facebook page Better Braintree Together. Just for transparency, I'd like to declare that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wrench.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yep, the same as Councillor Ritchie and Councillor Cunningham. Also the same regarding agenda item 5A. I was also approached by a member of the public on social media, but I have not engaged with that said member of the public, so we'll remain and discuss the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Abbott. I don't know that you wish to speak, do you?
Yes, I do, Madam Chairman.
Oh,
I think we need to take officer advice fairly urgently, because for the first time I'm aware, members are declaring they're on Facebook pages. Well, some of us are on a dozen or more Facebook pages. Are we supposed to be declaring that? It seems a new one.
Thank you, Councillor. I will investigate that and perhaps we'll get back to you. Or Emma's going to respond at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, it is entirely up to you to decide what interests that you declare, but what we say is you have to have regard to the business on the agenda, and if you have an interest that is relevant to an agenda item, they're the ones you are required to declare. Now, there is a culture of over-declaring here at Braintree District Council because members are very keen to be seen to be transparent. So if members have decided to declare they're a member of a Facebook group, then that is a matter for those individual members. However, unless there is a application on the agenda relating to that Facebook group, there's no need to declare an interest unless you have then been approached through the Facebook as a communication channel to lobby you or to seek views, or you've engaged in a conversation. So it is perfectly sound for members to over-declare, and if members feel that they need to declare their membership to that Facebook group, then that will be recorded in the usual way. If members are members of Facebook and there's not a relevant agenda item on the agenda this evening, then there's no need to make that declaration. So it's really down to individual members. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Emma. Councillor Cunningham, do you still wish to speak?
Yes, just very briefly, thank you for that, Madam Chairman, and thank you for the clarification from Emma. I have to say, having been a member of this authority for 9 years, that's the first time I've been incentivised by another member not to declare an interest. And I would just like to refer to the point that Emma made. Yes, there is a culture of over-declaration on this authority, but there's also a culture of absolute transparency. And I think, bearing in mind the particularly pertinent importance of matters to do with planning, I think that declaration was totally appropriate, and I presume other colleagues thought the same. Thanks, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of declarations of interest.
Apologies, Chairman. Councillor Abbott has indicated they wish to speak again.
Oh,
please.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Thank
I
you.
saw Councillor Abbott. Councillor Abbott, sorry. Your name came up 2 or 3 times. I thought you'd spoken. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Councillor Cunningham knows full well that was not my point. My point was to ask officers whether we needed to declare Facebook pages in general, and they kindly gave that advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Now move on to item 3. Members, I know you have been sent the minutes of the 2nd of June and the 9th of June, but tonight we are only going to be looking at the minutes for the 26th of May. They're all the only ones I'm asking you to agree. I am going to take silence as that you agree those minutes. Those minutes have been agreed. Thank you, members. That now brings us on to item 4, public question time. We do have a statement in public question time this evening, not associated with any application on the agenda this evening, and it is from Straits Mill Action Group, and it is going to be read by Alison. Alison, are you there?
Yes, hello, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alison.
Okay. The following relates to this committee's approval of the Straits Mill development on the 21st of January 2020. Public transport. The mitigation requested by ECC for public transport was an index-linked contribution for a subsidised bus service to serve the new development. The Section 106 agreement approved by this committee requires a financial contribution towards public transport facilities and/or bus service provision. Can the committee confirm that this council has the authority to require this additional mitigation for public transport? During the meeting, the presenting officer informed members of the amounts and intended use of this Section 106 contribution as follows. Public transport contribution, this is the bit that deals with bus services and bus provision, approximately £830,000. This would fund the remaining balance and the vast majority of the new town centre bus interchange. This is a really significant contribution. Can the committee advise why this significant contribution has been requested from the applicant? Highway improvements. In June 2017, it was stated at a scoping meeting for the transport assessment that the applicant could fully fund the proposed improvements to the Marks Farm roundabout. In May 2018, the transport assessment was issued, showing that the impact of this development on the Marks Farm roundabout was minimal. The A131 Braintree to Sudbury route-based strategy. In February 2019, ECC withdrew their offer of match funding for this scheme. The project was being jointly funded by the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, who were contributing £1.8 million. During 2019, a series of meetings took place at the CELIP. At the September meeting, a new business case was presented for improvements to the Marks Farm roundabout only, where it was stated that a Section 106 agreement for £1.334 million had been provisionally agreed with Gallagher Estates, the applicant for the Straits Mill development. At the CELIP meeting following the approval of this application, the board were told that the £1.8 million funding would no longer be required, as the Section 106 contributions have been effectively negotiated and will now provide the full funding package to deliver the Marks Farm project. thus achieving the objective set in June 2017, the full funding package being £1.34 million. The Section 106 agreement attached to this approval requires the completion of the upgrade scheme to the Marks Farm roundabout by the applicant. Can the committee confirm that these two planning obligations satisfy the three legal tests required by paragraph 56 of the MPPF? If the Chair is minded to provide a written response, the Council's constitution requires this to be completed within 5 working days. That's the statement by the Straits Mill Action Group, and that's the end of the statement, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I would like to thank the Straits Mill Action Group for submitting their statement, and they will get a written reply from officers. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That now brings us on to item 5, planning applications. Members, we have items in part B, but we do have statements on all except for item I, which is the application number 20000276HH, 17 Chelmer Road, Witham. That is the only application we could consider en bloc. Would anyone like to move that we agree that one en bloc, please?
I move, Madam Chairman. It's Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Do I have to find a seconder?
Second, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. That item has been agreed. Thank you, members. Before we start on the part A, I would just like to make 2 changes. I'll be taking item B before item A, and I will be taking item D after item E this evening. That is 2 changes to the running of the agenda. The first application we're taking is application 1702101, variation, Soaring High Primary School, Cone Road, Coggeshall, which can be found on pages 22 to 39. Now, I do have statements on both applications, so we'll take the statements at this stage. And the first statement is from Coggeshall Parish Council, and the statement is going to be read by Alison.
Hello, Madam Chairman.
Hello, Alison. Thank you.
This is a statement for Montessori School from Coggeshall Parish Council. The following has been provided to alleviate some of the concerns expressed by officers when considering this application and to support a granting of planning permission. 1. In their report, officers have expressed concern that the site is unsuitable for the school, especially if it grows. We wish to point out that Ofsted have limited the size of the school based on the current building at 71 pupils, so this is not possible. In addition, and to further mitigate against any growth, they are happy to accept a condition that there will be no more than 50 to 60 pupils, currently 51, with the exact number to be determined by the Planning Committee. 2. The school wish to highlight that over 80% of the pupils come from within a 3-mile radius, with some residents moving to the local area to access the school. 3. They need to change the green bus arrangement and provide a drop-off facility in order to comply with Ofsted child protection guidelines. 4. In response to the points cited as reasons for refusal, they believe that the following negates these reasons for refusal, commenting as follows. A. The large barn shown on the left of the image below is owned, rented by Montessori to provide office space and storage. Consequently, it has the majority of the parking on the hard standing allocated to this barn, and this is primarily what is used for the drop-off. Furthermore, they would be happy to I. Restrict pick-up and drop-off time to between 0800 and 0900 in the morning and 1500 and 1600 in the afternoons to avoid any interaction with other traffic on the site. II. Provide clear physical segregation for the pick-up and drop-off vehicles. B, in addition, they have worked with AWB Motorsport, the small one-man operated motor vehicle workshop, with regard to their use, storage needs and deliveries to ensure safety of those picking up and dropping off by agreeing to the suggested schedule above. 5. In addition, they have spoken with the owner of the barns, Marks Hall Estates, who supports our application, and as part of their tenancy agreements, they will restrict the number of vehicles associated with each unit, as well as confirm in writing the use of the land for pick-up and drop-off. We acknowledge this is not the most ideal site for the school, but as it is now an integral part of the Coggeshall community, we have suggested the above to mitigate concerns and assist with the planning application such that our application is supported by officers and the committee such that this critical educational service can survive. And that's the end of the statement, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. We have an additional statement on this application, and that is from Mr. Guy French, and he is the agent, and this is also going to be read by Alison.
This is the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement of the agent. This statement has been prepared on behalf of the applicant in support of agenda items 5A and 5B. The applicant is the principal and owner of Soaring High Montessori School, which achieved planning permission at Purley Farm in 2009. The applicant rents Purley Barn A from the Marks Hall estate. It provides an additional storage building and car parking to the school, which is located to the north of the immediate school site. The landlords are in full support of the school and these proposals. These applications relate to the variation of the approved car parking layout annexed to the original 2009 planning permission. The relocation of car parking is from within the immediate curtilage of the school grounds, as the applicants have been legally required by Ofsted and the Department of Education to implement safeguarding measures for pupils since the original 2009 permission. Furthermore, the movement of traffic internally within the school site between the two complexes of buildings would create a significant health and safety risk for staff and pupils. The applicant has repaired an area of hard standing that is annexed as car parking to the building to the north of the site. This area is used during the 36 weeks of term time for the parking of staff vehicles and the safe off-road drop-off and collection of children. An off-road woodland pedestrian path has been installed to enable parents to park their cars and walk their children to the school gates. Without the provision of car parking, pupils would have to be dropped off and collected from school on the highway, which creates an unsafe highway risk to both motorists, the pupils, and their families. The applications have been reviewed by the Right Honourable Priti Patel, who has written in respect of this application and given her full support to the proposals. The applicant proposes conditions to the committee to limit the school numbers to a maximum of 70, that's 10 per year group, at any one time, and to limit the hours for school drop-off and collections to 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. and 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Alison. Thank you. We'll now come to the presentation of this application, and the presentation is going to be made by Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Good evening, members. So we're going to deal with the application, which is about the variation of the condition first. So this is 17/0210 VAR. So we've changed the description of what's proposed here to try and make it clearer. And I'll just go through what that is. So what we're saying is this is an application for a variation of condition 3 of the approved application, the 2009 application, which includes amending the car parking arrangement plan, which is appended to the green travel plan to allow the parking of vehicles off-site. So this is at the Soaring High Montessori Primary School, Colne Road in Coggeshall. So when the application was originally received by the council and originally advertised, the description of development read application for removal of condition 3 and variation of condition 4. As we've explained in the report, I'll just touch on it briefly here. We don't think it's necessary for anything to happen to condition 4. So condition 4 required the applicant to submit details of the car parking that was to be provided at the school before it opened, and then to implement it when it was opened. So they did that. We discharged that condition, and the parking within the school grounds, we are told, did happen when it opened. Crucially, the condition didn't require that the car parking be retained in that form. So we don't see that there's any reason for a variation or removal of condition 4. So far as the council is concerned, condition 4 was complied with at the time. The applicant did that, and there's really nothing more to be said. It doesn't exercise any control over the parking because of the way, unfortunately, that it was worded. I think that was unintentional. I think the condition should have carried on to say that the car parking would continue to be provided in the approved form, but it didn't. So we are where we are. With regards to the removal of condition 3, as was clear from the application, the applicant is still proposing to operate a green travel plan, just an amended one. And the most crucial difference, not the only one, but the most crucial difference was the change to the car parking arrangements. So that's why we've revised the description of the application to reflect more closely what is actually being applied for and what the council, or the issue really that the council have to consider. So hopefully that helps clarifying that. So in terms of the application site, it is north of Coggeshall, so it's a fairly remote site, as you can see. The applicant quite helpfully provided the Ordnance Survey map there, so you can see north of the A120 and quite some distance from the village. And I've got some photos as we go through the presentations later to help. But this is the actual site itself. So there's a little cluster of buildings. So we've got a couple of residential properties close to the lane. We've got an old set of farm buildings, which is the red line site here, which is the actual school, which was granted the permission in 2009. And then you can see marked in blue on the other side of the lane to the north is the area, or part of the area, which is being used for car parking, and the Woodland Walk, which was also referred to. But for this application, we're talking about the variation of the Green Travel Plan, so we're really concerning ourselves principally with Purley Farm, so the red line site, which is to the south of the lane. So I thought, although it's set out in the report, it might just be helpful to quickly run through a couple of the most relevant parts of the planning history. So 2009, the application was made to change from B1 office to the Montessori Primary School. So members approved that. Probably of note there, just it's stated in the report, but just to highlight to members, there was a problem in terms of the action sheet and the conditions that were imposed. So the action sheet and the minutes of the meeting indicated or said that there will be a condition which would restrict the number of pupils to 25 pupils at the school. Unfortunately, when the decision notice was issued, that condition wasn't applied. So that's not any fault of the school, and the fact that they're operating with over 50 pupils at the moment doesn't put them in breach of condition. But by way of context, I think it's important to note that when members originally approved the application for the school, they clearly had in mind that it would be operating with that number of students that they had at the time, which was 25. So that was the 2009 application which granted the permission. There was an application later in 2009 to discharge the conditions which related to that. So that was conditions 3 and condition 4. So condition 3 was for the green travel plan, and condition 4 was the parking, as we talked about earlier. So those conditions were both deemed to be satisfactory, or the details were satisfactory, and those were approved in May 2010. There was an application in 2014 to vary the condition 3 of the application. That was removed. Officers had concerns about what was proposed there, didn't consider the revisions to the travel plan then to be appropriate. and that application was refused. So there are some other applications which are set out within the report which look at the hours that the school can operate. So we've approved some variations there to allow some limited operating of the school site on weekends and during the evenings. And there's also been an application for land on the northern side of the lane for a playing field to be used in connection with the school, but that was refused. But in terms of the green travel plan and the variation, those are probably the most relevant applications for members to have in mind tonight. So the green travel plan that was approved as a relatively short document included details of a minibus service that the school would operate and was committing to operating, as well as setting out the regular monitoring of travel modes for parents and students coming, and also a commitment to reporting information on what that was found, the monitoring. The document was reviewed at the time by the Sustainable Travel Team, or the Travel Plan Team at Essex County Council, and they considered that the plan was appropriate given the context of the site, because it is quite a remote rural site with quite a narrow lane leading to it. There's quite limited opportunities for walking and cycling. There's no public transport serving the site. So I think principally they were satisfied with the minibus service being operated, providing a connection to Coggeshall. That was a good commitment, and with other measures that were put in place to encourage things like car sharing, they were satisfied. So the council approved in May 2010 the Green Travel Plan. The condition requires that the provisions of that travel plan shall continue. So although condition 4, which I mentioned earlier about the car parking, didn't have that tailpiece to it, this does. So the travel plan remains in place, the one that's been approved. So there is a requirement to keep operating on that basis. So this within that green travel plan, there was details of the car parking arrangements at the site, and this is a plan which was included within that. So you can see that the car park area was sort of shown in what would have been, I guess, the old farmyard area between the farm, the converted farm buildings, or the converted rural buildings. So you can see there is a sort of walkway. So I think that's where Mr. French, the agent, was saying about pupils and students and staff moving between the two buildings. So you can see there is a sort of crossing there as you come in, but that's what was approved at the time. And I think from officers' point of view, we were happy with that. It kept the car parking within the school site, so it wasn't looking to spill beyond the site which had the planning permission, so it kept it contained. And we thought that was appropriate, and it also, we thought, would restrict the amount of cars coming to the site, because it was restricting the amount of car parking that was there, so it wasn't encouraging people to drive, and would hopefully encourage them to make use of the minibus service or other sustainable means, or to car share. So that was another reason that it was included within the Green Travel Plan and was approved. So that is what the car parking arrangements should be by virtue of condition 3. That's how the school should be operating. So the actual arrangement now, as shown in the application, shows that the area is being used for some storage of push bikes, but principally being used as an additional sort of playground or play area for the school. And you can see there's gates across the entrance to provide the security, which I guess the planning agent was referring to in his statement earlier. So this is an aerial photograph from 2018, which I think just shows the site in perhaps a slightly better context. So I'll put the red line of the application plan next to it. So the actual school site is a relatively small area within the site there, with the residential properties to either side. And then this is the areas that we'll be talking about with the change of use later on the northern side of the lane. So that's on slide 8. So we think the issue here really is that the school is in an unsustainable location. So it has planning permission granted for a relatively small number of pupils, or that was what certainly members had in mind. There wasn't a restriction put in, but that's certainly what was had in mind, I think, at the time when it was approved by committee. So although it was in an unsustainable location, a relatively low-key operation, operating all the activity operating within a defined site, so not requiring sort of parking over the road or additional buildings or anything like that. So what we approved was something which was quite contained by virtue of its size and the space that was available. So council policies then and now require that new or extended schools should have travel plans. So that's why the condition was on, and that's certainly why we think a green travel plan or a travel plan of some description needs to stay in place. So we don't think there's any policy basis for removing a travel plan, particularly given that this is a rural site, which is quite remote and where there are quite limited opportunities for pupils to walk or to cycle to school. So we think it's really important that the school continues to take every effort to try and reduce reliance on the private car, and that the green travel plan is the way of doing that, but to discourage private car use and to encourage people to get there in the most sustainable manner. So the plan also provides control by restricting the school's area of operation. So as I was saying, we've granted something, but we've granted it on quite a limited basis within quite a limited area of land. The continued use of the hard standing on the opposite side of the road would allow the creep of the school activity beyond the school site, beyond what was consented in 2009. We think whilst each application needs to be considered on its merits, we think if we were to change the green travel plan and not restrict the parking as was originally approved in 2009, then we think it will be harder for us to resist any further applications in the future to extend the school's area of operation to the other side of the road, whether that be for a playing field or for some other use of the barn A, which was referred to as being used as an office and for storage, and with the car parking to the side. So we think as the council's policies here in these rural areas are to operate restraint and to restrict inappropriate development and to protect the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, and also to direct development to more sustainable locations. We think that the proposal to increase the amount of car parking and to continue to operate with a higher number of students, or the current number of students, is sort of contrary to our planning policies. We would say that if the school can't operate within the confines of the site that was approved, then we would argue as officers that it's outgrown its approved site, and that what the school should be doing is looking for a more suitable site, and we would argue preferably one in a more accessible location where there are opportunities for students to walk or to cycle. Whilst I acknowledge the school have said that 80% of the students, pupils live within a 3-mile radius, I think because of the rural location, I think even living relatively close in terms of miles, it's very unlikely that students or parents would want to walk or to cycle regularly to the school with their children, I should say. Sorry. So in the report, we have acknowledged that there are benefits from the proposals in terms of social and economic benefits. So we've sort of carried out that planning balance exercise. So the Montessori school does offer additional and a wider range of school places within the area. It's obviously attracted a growing number of students from when it was originally approved. So it has an offer which is attractive to a number of families. And there are also economic benefits because the school does employ a number of teachers, and that obviously is generating income and putting money back into the local economy. So there certainly are benefits. But we think that when we look at overall, we think there is harm to looking at varying the green travel plan in the way that's been identified by lifting the parking restriction, but also the general lack of or the reduced commitments within the green travel plan. So the original approved travel plan has firmer commitments in terms of the minibus operation and in terms of monitoring and reporting. The new version we think is not as strong in those areas. So we think, notwithstanding a principal concern about an increase in car parking beyond the school site, we think the travel plan that's been submitted isn't appropriate and shouldn't be approved. So really we're recommending approval for those reasons. So really a principal issue with just thinking that we need to put a stop on the school expanding, and they need to operate within the area which is consented by the permission, but notwithstanding that, we think the variations to the green travel plan that have been put forward aren't appropriate. So the school are accepting a green travel plan needs to stay in place, but we don't think that the changes that are made to the green travel plan that have been put forward are appropriate. So for those reasons, we would recommend that the application is refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for explaining all that, Neil. Thank you. I have Councillor Unsworth to speak first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for the presentation. As I said, I've visited the site. The proposed car parking area at the back of the barn is actually within a series of brambles. It's hedged all the way around and really can't be seen. I'd just like to also comment that they haven't done any real work. They've just cleared brambles back on this particular site. I've had
Councillor, we're talking about the variation one. We're not onto the first one yet. So can we stick to the one we're discussing?
So really, it's Ofsted that have forced this thing. Ofsted have actually said they can't bring cars onto the site now to protect the children. So in terms of varying it, this is the only way this school continue to operate. I think they have made as much amends as possible to make as many conditions in place to help the planning people, the planning team and the officers make this as good as possible under the circumstances. You know, I think this is one of those situations where we actually need to move for approval on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I think I'm right in understanding there are 50 children now at the school. And it's quite clear to me from what I've read and what I've understood that it is just not possible to use the area between the barns anymore as a car park. It simply would not be safe for the children to have car movements. And bear in mind, it's a primary school with very young children. And also it would not be acceptable to Ofsted. So it is simply not possible to use that area as a car park. The only other alternative is to park on the road. And having visited the site myself previously, I know it is a very, very narrow lane. It'd be difficult for cars to go past. There'll be issues with children dodging in and out of parked cars, trying to walk to the school gate. So that also is not at all satisfactory. And it seems to me that using the area of land opposite, which is currently rented by the school, is perfectly acceptable for parking. The report says there is no landscape harm. There is no objection from highways. There is no impact on the neighbours. The application is supported by the parish council. So I, for one, cannot really see a good reason why this shouldn't be granted. This is to, I know it's a variation, but it's the variation of the travel plan, which would include the revised parking area. And I also would remind members about the revised National Planning Policy Framework, which at paragraph 94 does stress the importance of providing sufficient choice of school places, and a Montessori school like this offers parents a choice, and this paragraph 94 says that local planning authorities should take a proactive, positive, and collaborative approach to meeting this requirement, and they should, it says, give great weight to the need to create, expand, or alter schools. So I do think there is national planning policy support to allow this school to expand. There's obviously a limit to the numbers there's a limit to the number of pupils it can take, and that a condition has been offered to that effect. So I, for one, I do not see there's any real reason why we should refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Parker. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So in general terms, obviously green travel plans are a very good thing and something I'd always support. I think we're in a difficult position though with this application because, to state the obvious, we are where we are. They've got planning permission to be where they are as a school, and we have to deal with what's in front of us. And there's 3 points that I'd like to put to officers, please, as questions. Firstly, in the report, it states that there's no response from county highways. Have we subsequently had any response. Secondly, on a sort of technical and legal perspective, what happens if we refuse this first application? Because I noticed the order has been reversed. If we refuse this first application that we're discussing, does that fetter our ability to grant the second? And thirdly, what is the fallback position? So if officers accept the Ofsted position, which is that central area within the buildings cannot be used as a car park, and we both refuse this and the next application, would that effectively mean the school would have to close? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. I will ask Neil to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. So in answer to those questions, we don't have a response from Essex Highways. I've chased on numerous occasions, but no response. With regards to the decision that's made on this application, would it fetter your ability to make a different decision or a decision on the second one? I don't think it does. I think the issue in terms of the green travel, or one of the issues with the green travel plan for officers, is the parking. And as we've tried to explain, the only control that we have over car parking at the site at the moment is through the approved green travel plan. So if we approve another green travel plan which doesn't have car parking control within it, then we've lost control of car parking altogether. So you can then approve something over the road, or you could approve whatever you want, or you could refuse it. So the green travel plan is more than just the parking arrangements. So we have spoken quite a lot. I've spoken quite a lot about the parking, because I think it's probably the single biggest issue with the school. But I think, like I say, there are other issues with the green travel plan, so far as I'm concerned as an officer, beyond the parking. So I think even if members felt that they were sympathetic to the school's position, I would recommend that we don't approve the green travel plan that's been submitted, because I don't think, irrespective of the parking issue, I don't think it does everything that we would need to, and I think we would need to look at that more carefully if that was members. But in answer to the question, I think the green travel plan is one thing. The change of use is a separate application and should be assessed on its own merit. In terms of the fallback position, I think that the issue is if Ofsted are saying that the school can't park within the approved site, then obviously, and people are driving to the site and are dropping children off, then they will either need to park somewhere else or they will need to drop off on the lane. I think as I said, we think as officers, part of the issue here, or a large part of the issue here, is that the number of pupils at the school has grown beyond what was intended and really what the site's capacity is. I understand what Councillor Parker is saying about the government encouraging greater school choices, and we're not against the Montessori school. We just think that the school is operating on a site which is constrained, and when you look at the planning policies, which look at preventing inappropriate development, looking at things spilling into the countryside, having an impact on the character and the surrounding, then we think what's being proposed here is contrary to the policies. So I think the fallback position is the school doesn't have to close, but I think, as Councillor Parker said, that if they can't park within the school when they're dropping off, then there would need to be another arrangement in place. So whether that be dropping off on the road, using the hard standing in front of the buildings, or using the parking area at the back of the buildings. Does that hopefully help, Councillor Abbott?
Up to a point, I think it's very disappointing that we haven't got anything from Highways, and I acknowledge that you've tried, Neil, to get a response. But I think technically, for me, your answer to the second question is important, because I was concerned that if whatever decision we made on this one could affect what we say on the second one. So what in effect you're saying is we could refuse this, and then they would have to stick to the existing travel plan, but that wouldn't affect our ability to grant the car parking on the other side of the road. Because to me, there seems to be a conflict between the two applications on that.
So if it's okay to come back, thank you, Councillor Scattergood. So I think, Councillor Abbott, what you could do is you could, if members wanted to, they could refuse this application to vary the green travel plan, and that means that there isn't a new travel plan to replace the 2009 one. The change of use application, which we'll consider next, if members were to approve that, then that would conflict with the 2009, the approved travel plan. But I think from the council's point of view, and as officers, we wouldn't be taking any sort of enforcement action against the breach of condition 3 on the 2009 permission, because they're not operating in accordance with the approved green travel plan, because members have approved the parking on the other side of the road. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think you're sort of fettered in what you do with the other application. Should be considered on its own merits. It doesn't need to be bound by what you're considering with the green travel plan.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Wrench.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I can totally appreciate this as a complex situation. Just to clarify, first of all, on the pickup times between 8 and 9 and between 3 and 4, that would pose some difficulties for the school to maintain, because as people will be aware, children do get ill during the school day, and children do need picking up for various appointments. So there needs to be some work on that, because unfortunately the parents will need access to the school between those hours, and what would happen there. I've heard the word Ofsted quite a few times during their presentation, and it's another question to officers around, have we seen any evidence that Ofsted have requested this? Because again, that word has been said, but I've not seen any paperwork or any letter that's been given to the school, because actually I have tried to do as much research into this, and if I refer to the school's updated Ofsted report, it actually states within the report itself as having a number of strengths. And if I refer to, on page 4 of their Ofsted report, it actually does state that the arrangements for safeguarding are effective, and it later reports in there actually that the school site is safe and secure. So I just wanted to make other members aware of that, because although I appreciate that there are obvious concerns, I've not seen any evidence that Ofsted have raised any such concerns, although there seems to be a lot of weight added behind Ofsted's claims. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wrench. I'll ask Neil to come back on that before I move on. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Wrench, just on those points, I haven't seen anything in terms of proof from Ofsted. I must confess I've taken the school and the planning agent at their word with regards to what Ofsted's licence says. Good point on the arrangements for safeguarding and the site being secure. I think that the point I would make there is that is, I would assume, referring to the arrangements that the school have in place at the moment. This is a retrospective application, so they have been operating the parking on the other side of the road for some time. So I guess if the Ofsted inspector went out, sort of last year, then the school site would have been secure, because the car parking wasn't taking place within the school grounds. Had the car parking been taking place in the school grounds, then I guess the Ofsted report would have said something different. So just to sort of clarify on that, hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Unsworth, I will let you come back.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of quick ones. Again, following up the Ofsted. The Ofsted have actually limited the size of the school, and there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect between what Ofsted have said in terms of the size of the school limiting and the pupils. So I think we could probably do something about addressing that. There's a couple of other points. The officer mentioned that it's not an appropriate location. There isn't anywhere else in Coggeshall for anywhere like this. It couldn't move. It would, if it couldn't get the car parking sorted out, I don't know what they would do. And we can't advocating parking on the highway down a narrow lane as a solution if we don't approve this. I'd like to move, but we approve this, please, for planning.
You're approving the variation.
Yes, please. I'd like to move. We approve it.
Does that find a seconder before I move on?
Yes, Councillor Abbott, I'll second it to test the water.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. My question was going to be about the Ofsted evidence, and that has been partially addressed. I mean, basic problem here is that the school has changed the parking arrangements without any reference at all to the LPA, which I think is a fundamental error. I recall in part some of us were present at the original application and permission. Certainly the spirit was that this would be a low-key, very small operation with the parking as in that original permission. We've gone away from that. I mean, the school has obviously been a victim in part of its own success, but we're operating at double the size that we envisaged when we gave the original permission and looked at that original green travel plan. I do recall that much play was made in the travel plan of the minibus service, and that for some members I think was a clincher, and so I'd be quite sort of interested in the view of officers on the role of the minibus now on offer, and in answer to Councillor Parker, who cited the national framework in support, I would suggest that the national framework would not support a school in any event in an unsustainable location. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Thank you. Does anyone want to come? I'm going to ask Chris Padgett to come back in a moment.
Thank you, Councillor. Sounds good. Thank you, members. I just wanted to pick up just a couple of points, just in terms of clarification. Obviously, Neil's gone through it in detail. I think there is a point here that effectively, in terms of that parking arrangement, we've got to remember that this, as Councillor Mann mentioned, effectively the change that's happened has been without referral or approval from the local planning authority, and effectively this was something that was originally proposed by the school. This wasn't imposed on the school. This was something that the school actually came forward and said this is going to be the proposed arrangement. I won't reiterate the point because Neil's covered it in terms of the school effectively outgrowing the site. But just to respond to one point Councillor Unsworth raised in terms of alternative sites, my advice would be that there could well be alternative sites for the school within the local area, and I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that there couldn't be an alternative that could be found. And I think from the planning authority side, and to pick up a point that Councillor Parker raised, clearly, the school itself is actually doing some very positive things here. We would obviously look to work proactively over finding a more suitable site, and actually, in terms of a successful school, finding a site that would enable them to grow further and expand further in a much more sustainable location. So I would just add that comment into the debate from officers' perspective on that. But as I said, critically, the situation effectively that we're looking at here this evening is a situation that was originally proposed by the school, was put forward from them, and it was granted on that basis. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to ask Neil to come back now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on something that Councillor Mann raised when he was speaking just now. So just to confirm, the school does operate a minibus service, and within the representations that we've received, I think one of the I think one of the parents possibly who drives a minibus explains in their representation that they do currently make 2 runs. So I think it's a 17-seat minibus. So it makes 2 runs sort of morning before school and then 2 in the afternoon. So in fairness, at the moment, the school is continuing to operate a minibus service, and there is presumably a reasonable loading on those, although I couldn't tell you whether both are full, but certainly they're making 2 runs, which would indicate there's a reasonable take up of it. I think, just without sort of labouring a point, I think even if members are sympathetic to the situation the school is in and the parking and so on, I would just ask members to have in their own minds when they're thinking about that, whether they think the green travel plan that's been submitted is sufficiently robust, has enough monitoring and enough commitments in it for us to approve, because as I understand it, the members are it has been moved and seconded that the application is approved, and obviously if you do that you would be approving the green travel plan that's been submitted. So a lot of the conversation and the discussion tonight is concentrated on car parking, understandably, but the green travel plan is more than just a car parking issue. So I just wanted to highlight that to members. If members have read it and they're quite comfortable and they think it's a sufficiently robust document and doesn't need adding to, then obviously that's additions to make. But I just wanted to make sure that members had that in their minds when they were considering how best to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for letting me have a second go. I still haven't heard anything which convinces me there's a viable fallback. I appreciate, as many members and officers have quite rightly said, we don't have anything clear cut from Ofsted, but equally we don't have anything which says they could go back to what they were doing before in terms of the car parking within the school buildings. I take the point absolutely from Neil about the green travel plan being a lot more than the car park, but on that, can he say, please, do we know what the arrangements are for the minibus? Where does it drop off? Where does it circulate? Does it go onto the school site as previous, where the car park was, or does it use the new car park which does not yet have consent?
Can you answer that?
I can try.
He can try.
So certainly when I've been out to site, the minibus is parked on the other side of the road, so it's just over from the school entrance. So I couldn't say definitively whether the minibus enters the site to drop off or whether the children are walked across the road from the other side of the lane. Just in terms of the green travel plan, I mean, the green travel plan which I've got here does talk about the minibus and Coggeshall residents being encouraged to use it, but again, not wishing to labour a point, I don't think it's as strong and as robust as the previous version. So for us, when we're looking at travel plans, and the county council help us with them, we're usually looking for firm commitments on what's going to happen, so some guarantees, and then there's regular monitoring that's reported back to the local planning authority, so that we can look at whether further measures are needed or whether things should be refined. So my concern, which we have tried to sort of cover in the officer's report, is that the travel plan that's been put forward with this application, which is the one dated August 17, is a sort of weaker version of the one that we approved in 2009.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Councillor Mrs. Spray, your microphone is turned off.
Sorry,
Please,
I must have done it. I'll start again.
Thank you.
Apologies. This is to take nothing away from the school, who are apparently doing a very good job of educating and caring for the children. But bearing in mind that we are looking at the variation here, and Neil's comments a few minutes ago, page 35 of our agenda, the third paragraph, condition number 3 required that the travel plan shall be adhered to at all times Officers have been unable to locate any reports being submitted for review by the school. Whilst officers accept that maintaining a daily register throughout the year was not necessary, the level of monitoring and reporting proposed in the new plan is not adequate. And I think for me that sums up what is it's a tricky one, this, but I think that sums it up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Well, I think I haven't anyone else wishing to speak at the moment, but I have a motion on the table. The motion is to approve this application, and that motion was moved by Councillor Unsworth and seconded by Councillor Abbott. I'm going to put this motion, this is the motion to approve it. I go through the alphabetical order. Councillor.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, just before members vote, just so everybody's clear, a number of points during the discussion, there was raised about a condition controlling the number of pupils. And I don't know what Councillor Unsworth and Councillor Abbott have in mind, so they're the ones who've moved this. And I just wanted, before the vote was taken, whether they wanted to say anything on that, because that might be something the members want to have in mind, whether there's any restrictions imposed or not. Sorry, Chair.
Councillor Unsworth, did you hear all that?
Yes, thank you. Please excuse me for not finishing off, because it's obviously the first time I've done this. I think it would be appropriate to add some conditions to this, that we approve the plan, which has got timescales on it, along the lines of which the applicant has said they would accept, that they would actually limit the number of pupils along the lines they would accept, etc., etc. If we can.
But how many?
Could you come back on this one, because we do.
Thank you, Councillor Scarsgood. So I think from officers' perspective, I think Neil obviously right to raise the issue. I think we need to be clear in terms of, from yourself, Councillor Unsworth, in terms of what you'd be looking for specifically in terms of the conditions. Just to comment, and going back to the two statements that were made during public question time, I do note that the statement by the parish council, and sorry, just bear with me, I'm just scrolling myself through back to the statement. I think there was reference there to a restriction being around 50 to 60 pupils. I think currently there are 51 at the school, but I think, and again, if I just bring up the statement from the agent, there is a reference to, sorry members, just bear with me, I'm just reopening the statement. I think it was 70, but it was expressed as a maximum of 70, which I think accords with effectively the maximum that's allowed by Ofsted. So I think it would be useful to have some clarity from Councillor Unsworth what we'd be looking at, or what you are seeking in terms of conditions, and similarly in terms of your reference, the timescales, just exactly what you would be envisaging there, but happy to provide some further advice if we can have a little bit of further clarity on those points.
Councillor Unsworth.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think it would be an opportunity to link the size of the school to Ofsted. So as the statement by Mr. French has said, to 70, which is just below the Ofsted. And then if we can link the times of operation to what they've said in there. So I think they've said collections at 8 AM to 9:30 PM and 3 PM to 4:30 PM, and picking up on Councillor Wrench's point, with exceptions for urgent or emergency pickups. I think that would probably cover it.
Thank you, Councillor. Chris, are you going to respond to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Unsworth. Councillor Scattergood, if I may, perhaps just given the importance of this particular point, could I maybe just request a short adjournment of the meeting to allow Neil and I just to confer on those points? We can give some further advice to members on those 2 points, if that would be acceptable.
Certainly.
Thank you, Chairman. Webcasting officer, please can you just prepare to adjourn. It's necessary to adjourn this meeting for officers to consider a response to members' questions. Please can the webcasting officer confirm that the YouTube broadcast has been paused? commenced?
Yes, I can confirm we've recommenced.
Thank you very much, Webcasting Officer. Thank you, members. Thank you for being patient while we have this short period of adjournment to enable officers to consider the questions posed to them. I can confirm there has been no debate during the period of adjournment. Thank you, members. I now hand back to the Chairman. Please invite the officers to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to ask Chris Paget to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scattergood, and thank you, members, just for bearing with us for those couple of minutes. I think there's 3 points that I'd make. The first is in relation to the variation. Just to be absolutely clear, we have a revised green travel plan, which effectively would be approved if members were minded to approve that this evening. So just to be clear that would be the effect of approving the application. It would be approving the revised green travel plan. The second point, in terms of limiting the numbers of pupils at the school, we do think a condition could be introduced on that. The only comment I would make, again, I'm not trying to labour the point, but at the moment I think the current number of pupils at the school is 51. This would actually allow for a further increase in the number of pupils at the school over and above what is actually there at the present time. So again, I'll just ask members to have that in their minds in terms of considering. And then lastly, the point about restricting the timescales for drop-off and pick-up, I think from Neil and I's perspective, we have some concerns in terms of imposing that type of condition. Firstly, and coming back to the test for a planning condition, is it actually necessary in this case? The way the school is going to operate is that there will be set times when the school pick-up and drop-off is going to operate, and therefore what we're actually seeking to achieve by the restriction. There is the point that Councillor Wrench raised earlier in terms of needing some flexibility around it, and being mindful of that. There's then a question, I think, in terms of the enforceability of the condition. So, from officers' perspective, we think that a restriction could be imposed in terms of pupil numbers. That would be a condition that could be imposed, but the officer advice would be not to impose a condition restricting drop-off and pick-up times, because that will effectively be predetermined by the way how the school would be operating. So hopefully, Madam Chairman, that clarifies those points, and I'll hand back to yourself.
Thank you. I'll go back to Councillor Unsworth.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy with that. If we put the condition on regarding the numbers, and then if you feel that a condition with regard to pick-up and drop-off time is going to be unenforceable, then let's leave it at the numbers and restrict the numbers and go from there. Thank you.
So Councillor, you are moving approval with the restriction of the numbers as 70. Is that correct?
That is what the offer. That's what the.
Is that what you are proposing?
Yes,
I'm
yes.
not worried about Ofsted. I want to know what you're
No, I was
proposing.
going to say the report. The report says. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Abbott, as you've seconded it, are you happy with that?
Yes, I am, Madam Chairman, and I was going to say I didn't think the hours on the use of the car park would be enforceable, but I'm happy with the numbers one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to put that to the vote. I'm putting to the vote that we approve this application with a restriction of 70 pupils. Councillor Abbott.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
Against.
Councillor Cunningham.
Against.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson. Thank you. Councillor Mann.
Against.
Councillor Monday.
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Abstain.
Councillor Rishi.
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Against.
Councillor Unsworth.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
Against.
Thank you, councillors. That's 8 against. 1, 2, 3, 4. That motion has fallen, members. So I need someone to move recommendation. I'm sorry, I didn't catch who that was.
Madam Chairman, Councillor Cunningham here. I'm happy to move officer recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, councillor. Does that find a seconder?
Yes, Madam Chairman, Councillor Mrs. Spray will second that.
Thank you. So the motion now on the table is refusal, and it has been moved by Councillor Cunningham and seconded by Councillor Mrs. Spray. I'll go through the voting list once again. Councillor Abbott.
Abstain.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
Abstain.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Abstain.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Answorth.
Against.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That application has been refused. Thank you. We now move on to the application 1702100 Soaring High Primary School, Cone Road. We've had these speakers on this application, so we now go straight to the presentation, which once again will be made by Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an application for the continued use of an existing hard standing to provide a car park to serve the Soaring High Montessori Primary School. So the red line is obviously the flip to the previous application. So you can see this is on the northern side of the road. So you can see it includes roughly half the hard standing to the rear of these two buildings to the front of the site, has an access in off the lane at the front here. The site is drawn rather unusually, so it includes one of the buildings, one of the two barns that stands on the site, includes the woodland copse, and it includes this, includes that field margin along the edge of a lane, and that's because a woodland path or a wood chip path has been installed to provide a connection from the car park to the front of the school. So what effectively happens is you can walk from the car park once you've been dropped off by your parents or with your parents along the edge of a lane here, so you're not actually having to walk along the lane or the verge, and then there's a crossing point just opposite the school gates here, so you would cross over the lane there. So this is the plan which the applicant has provided. So you can see the path, that I was just referring to earlier. That probably would have been easier to show you on here, so apologies for that. But you can see a parking area at the back here with a bund which is actually planted up beyond, and then the school is just over on this site. So again, I've got the aerial photo there, so you can see the parking for the school would just be on that sort of left-hand side of the hard standing there. So this is an arrangement that has been in place for some time, and the school has been operating that way. And obviously that has meant that the school has been operating with the playground between the buildings, not the car park as approved. So that's just covering what we had before. So in terms of photos and context here, so there's a couple of photos of the lane. So you can see quite narrow, limited passing opportunities. This is coming from the main road. This is you get quite close. So as you can see along most of the lane, there's quite a strong hedge. There's a couple of little places where there's small gaps, but it's actually quite solid as you walk along. And certainly if you walk along, you would sort of struggle to catch much by way of glimpses of the hard standing at the back. So this is coming from the main road. As you get a bit closer, this is the sort of the copse on the western side of the hard standing, so you can see quite well screened from the road even when you get quite close. This is from the east looking back, so you can see the buildings, well, you can't see the buildings I should say, behind the hedge at the front here. More broken, limited vegetation at the back on this side. The school's parking will be on the other side, but again not sort of particularly prominent in terms of landscape. So these are a couple of photos of the parking area. So the one on the left is looking back, so again open and exposed at the back, but no sort of wider landscape impact. It's sort of relatively enclosed, the field beyond, so no significant landscape harm. The photo on the right is the hard standing. So the school's area would be on the right hand side of that photo. Sort of you can see the white car parked there when we visited the site. The parking on the left hand side is to do with the motorsports, or the garage that operates from the other barn building at the front of the site. So that's a photo which was taken a couple of years ago. So you can see the reason I included this was obviously taken at a different time of year and with less vegetation, but you can see now the vegetation is much stronger and much more enclosed. So as we've said in the officer report, we don't think there's an issue in terms of landscape harm. I think even on the occasions or the times of day when parents will be parking there and you might have a solid row of cars along one side, we don't think that would actually have a significant landscape impact in itself. You wouldn't get a sense of it, or it wouldn't be unduly prominent in the wider landscape. So photos from the front, so you can see the school's minibus there parked at the front, and that's certainly sort of seems to be like an allocated parking space. You can see there's some little signs at the front. I think there's some staff parking in front of that building as well, which the agent has advised us is used by the school for storage and as office space. So I mean that's quite a substantial building. It's something I guess around 30 metres long, maybe 8, 9, 10 metres wide, so quite a large building, but that's not although it's within the red line, there's no change of use proposed for that. It's just the change of use for the car parking that's proposed. But you can see just in terms of sort of as you're passing the site, there is that signage on the front there, which is slightly jarring, although I accept that the motorsports or the garage next door, obviously when they're open and operating, that you can see what's going on there. So perhaps not overly harmful in the round in terms of visual impact. A couple of photos of the path. So the one on the left is the path as it exits from the car park, the hard standing at the back, and then the photo on the right is the gated entrance to the lane. So that's where parents and students would come out if they walk round from the car park, round the edge of the field, get to that point through the gate, and then they'd cross over the lane to get to the school entrance. So you can see there on this photo, you can just make out the fence on the left-hand side where the gate is, and that's the school entrance on the right-hand side of the road. So that's just a photo of the school buildings. So you can see the sort of converted buildings. So just in terms of what we're looking at here, we should always sort of consider what the development plan says. So this is countryside planning policies apply, so rural restraint. The school has planning permission to operate, but within a clearly defined site. So this is extending the operation of a school over the road onto the other side. So as we've said before, planning permission was granted by members based on reusing existing buildings and within a self-contained site, and at the time was to provide facilities for 24 pupils. The planning history indicates that the school's outgrown the site, as we've covered before, and we're currently looking at over 50 people, so it's doubled already. And as we've heard, Ofsted are saying with the current facilities that the school has available to it, it's actually licensed for up to 70, so some scope for growth. And I guess if the school was to get extra land or extra facilities, I'm not quite sure what the restriction was that led to Ofsted imposing the 70, but if additional sort of buildings were to become available, or play areas, if that was the issue, then perhaps there's the opportunity for Ofsted to increase that in the future. My understanding would be the limit would be on the facilities that are available to the school. So with the council have previously refused an application which was made by the school for a playing field on the northern side of the lane, actually just opposite the school gates. I'd have to say, having visited the site sort of recently this year and having looked at the aerial photography from 2018, although we refused the application for that area to be used as a school playing field, it does look like it's mown grass. Now, I've not seen the school using it, and I'm not suggesting that they are, because I have no evidence and I've not spoken to the planning agent, but I think it does remind me that we are looking at a school here which has grown in numbers and which has been and continues to look to expand its operation to sort of operate within current standards and with the number of students that it's got. So just in terms of summary, we've sort of looked at planning balance as usual. So we accept the economic and social benefits, which I've referred to, but we do think there's harm here. So we do think that regularising the use of that area for parking, so it's an existing hard standing, has been for a number of years, but by allowing the school to use that for car parking, we think just allows them to continue to operate with the number of students they've got at the moment, or perhaps more in the future, because parking will be less of an issue. And we think that is contrary to our sort of development plan policies of rural restraint, and where we're looking to seek development towards more sustainable locations. So for these reasons, we think this application for the change of use of the land for the car parking should also be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Neil. Councillor Unsworth, you did indicate when you signed for the others applications. I'll take you first.
I mean, obviously, we've now got to do something about the parking for this school. Otherwise, we severely harm the future potential for this school. I think the same conditions that we could put, we looked at putting in place on the previous one, we could put in place on here and limit the numbers again. But some of these items that are in the report recommending refusal have actually been negated by the fact that the barn is now actually under the control of Montessori and will be under the control of Montessori whilst the school exists, and that has been independently confirmed by Marks Hall Estates. So there will be no other commercial use of that barn, as far as I'm aware. They've got to park the school. They've got to park the cars somewhere. Surely we cannot actually advocate parking these cars on the road. There will be car travel, and I think especially given where we are with COVID-19 and it's not going to go away, there's going to be part of the people bringing their pupils to the school that are going to want to keep a social distance. And without some form of parking and then walking the kids to school like this, they're not going to be able to do that. And I think we have a responsibility to act sensibly with this and try and encourage this school to keep in operation. I think we've got to look at approving this. I think to refuse this is actually going to completely and utterly throttle this school. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. So we don't have any highways objection from Essex County Council, and we don't have any landscape objection. And I think the officer set out that this is actually quite a well screened location. I would repeat what I said for the previous application. I don't like the situation. I hate it when we're dealing with retrospective applications where applicants have gone ahead anyway and then they're coming back to regularise something they've already done. However, we are where we are, and the biggest thing, having thought about this a lot today, is my concern about the fallback. What happens if we refuse these applications? Now, just now, Mr. Jones very helpfully confirmed that the minibus is using the land we're talking about for change of use. So if we refuse this, are we then even saying that the minibus has nowhere to park, which actually, from the evidence we've been given tonight, is being used in a sustainable way, doing 2 trips in the morning and 2 trips in the evening. That central area, which was used for car parking within the school, is now a playground. And so on the evidence we've got at the moment, it doesn't appear that there is a fallback to start using that central area within the school for any form of parking again. And therefore, I agree with Councillor Unsworth. If we refuse this, we could effectively be going down a route of this school not being able to function at all. So whilst I definitely don't like the situation we're in, I think we have to approve this with conditions in order to allow the school to continue. Otherwise, we risk actually potentially precipitating its closure. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I won't go over what I've said in the previous application, but simply to say that the majority of pupils, I think, come to the school using the school bus, it would seem. There are obviously some children who come to the school. They probably live in villages where there is no public transport and the people who live in villages do need to get to school as well. So, and there has to be somewhere for children, cars to park, so children can be dropped off to go to school. There is a green travel plan to try and reduce this as much as possible, the driving, which I fully support. But this school, a school does need to have a car park. You cannot just simply have children, cars parking on a road, especially when it's a narrow lane like that. It's just too dangerous. So I would support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Obviously, have a certain amount of sympathy for the applicant in these circumstances, and obviously, you know, I appreciate these decisions will have an impact. But let us not forget, this is a retrospective application on a site where a school is placed, where that school has obviously outgrown its surroundings. It's very clear. There's a substantial business point to this planning application, and the school has outgrown that site. Therefore, Madam Chairman, having read the report, I'm happy to move officer recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Does that find a seconder before I move on, please?
Yes, Madam Chairman. Councillor Mrs. Spray, I'll second.
Thank you. And you did indicate you wish to speak, and you're next. So, Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. This is very difficult. I said before, and I repeat again, that nothing against the school who are doing excellent work, but just to point out that I think it's for about the last 7 years that they've been using this parking space, this hard standing, unauthorised, as you know, as parking. And I acknowledge that the building adjacent to that parking plot is let to the school by Marks Hall, who've said that they can have it for as long as the school is there in existence. That's fine, unless that situation changes at any point, unless Marks Hall decides that they need the building for their own purposes, or they want to sell the building, in which case there is potentially then no parking for whoever takes on that building. So it's not a totally secure arrangement. But I think for me, the main issue is that they really should not have been using this plot at all. I appreciate it puts them in a very difficult position, but you know, planning rules are planning rules. So I'm sorry, I'm going to second the motion for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Just very quickly, Madam Chairman, thank you. I just would like to remind members that even if the school had only 24 pupils, like we had originally agreed, there would still be a requirement for parking, and you would not be allowed to park in the middle of the site because it is not safe for children to have cars manoeuvring in there with young children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Parker. Chris would like to come back. Chris, please.
Thank you, Councillor Scasgood. Just going back on that point, Councillor Parker, that you just raised, I think, again, it's just important to emphasise, obviously, the situation that was originally proposed was parking on the site, and that was put forward by the school. That's how they set out within their original submission, how they were intending to operate. They haven't operated in that way. They have operated in a different way, which has included the unauthorised use of this particular land on the other side. So I just want to make that point, that this is not a situation that has effectively we're officers of or the authority have turned around and said we're going back on a situation that was agreed. The agreed situation, the situation that was approved previously by the authority, was for parking on the site. In acknowledgement of that, and really just to reiterate a point that Neil made as part of the presentation, at the moment the confines of the site is restricted. As soon as a incursion, I think, is made on the other side, I think in my view, from a development management perspective, it becomes incredibly difficult then to resist further expansion of the actual school. And the school's obviously moved on, and as I said already, there's obviously doing an awful lot of good work, and they're successful in terms of the educational use that they're establishing. And obviously, depending on what members decide tonight, there could potentially then be a conversation around, actually, well, this is now the situation. They have outgrown the site. We need to work with you to find an alternative site in the locality so that actually the school could continue to grow, but in a much more sustainable way than they are at the moment, without the benefit of planning permission. So I just wanted to make those couple of points.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Wrench.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to make a point around the school providing parking. It is a highly unusual thing to happen that schools would provide parking for parents. They normally provide parking for their staff, but the vast majority of schools I've either been to or visited, they are normally in a sustainable location where their parking would. I suppose in this isolated instance, that begs the question which has been raised, that maybe this isn't the ideal location, and possibly that's something that the school needs to resolve. And it is regretful because, unfortunately, I do believe that the parking situation is a big issue on this case. So just to clarify a point to officers, what is the, unless I've missed it in the detail, but how many spaces will be provided via this parking? Are we aware of that? Because with the increase of 71 or 70 potential children, I'm assuming obviously there may be some siblings, so it's unlikely we'll have 70 children arriving by car. But also one member did raise that the majority were arriving by minibus. I'm not sure that is the case. Can we just confirm if we're aware of how many are also currently arriving by the minibus service as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wrench. Officers are investigating that. I do recall the mention of 17 on each in the minibus at any one time, and 2 17s is 34, and 34 from 70 leaves a lot still coming by car in my calculations. But officers are looking to see if they can find out the exact amount of car parking spaces.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of my colleagues has just found it for me in my own report to remind me. We've sort of made a rough calculation. So I think the plan that was submitted with the application wasn't drawn to scale, but sort of using a sort of rough approximation, we think approximately 17 cars could probably be parked along that side of the hard standing.
Answer your query, Councillor Wrench. 17 cars, possibly.
Yes, thank you. I was just trying to work out, obviously during that time that the children are arriving, how many, it's hard to obviously know without the detail how many. It would have been useful to know from the school's perspective how many spaces would be needed for the demand if they did increase to 70, whether or not that's a sustainable enough car park to meet the growing need of the school as well. I suppose we don't. Thank you.
Councillor Unsworth, I will let you come back once more.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to confirm, we've got 51 pupils, as I understand, and something like 34 are coming in on the bus. So there's only a nominal amount, a much smaller amount, percentage coming in. It is for pick-up and drop-off. The actual staff member cars won't fill the car park, and we're looking at a pick-up and drop-off system here, not full parking for all of the parents who bring their pupils in. They park, walk the kids in, and then they leave. I think if we go ahead down this route, we're just going to force the closure of this school, and I can't support that, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, I know there's 50 at the moment, but they are looking to increase to 70, so you've got to take that into account when working out the parking spaces.
But we could restrict that.
No one else has indicated they wish to speak, so I'm going to put it to the vote because it has been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, starting with Councillor Abbott.
Against.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs Parker.
Against.
Councillor Rishi.
For.
Councillor Mrs Spray.
For.
Councillor Unsworth.
Against.
Councillor Wrench.
Abstain.
Abstain. Thank you. That application has been refused, members. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We now move on to the next application on the agenda, which is the application 190220004, Warwick House, 48 Collingwood Road, Witham. And I do have statements on this from Witham Town Council. And I will ask Alison to read the statement, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank
Planning
you,
application number 19-02200 FUL. As you will be aware, previous applications prior to that referenced above have been made by the applicant. The first, under reference 19-01118 COUPA, came before the Planning Applications and Transport Committee of Witham Town Council in July 2019 and related to the conversion of commercial premises to accommodate 10 dwellings by means of flats. At the time, Witham Town Council considered this to be overdevelopment of a property which occupies a prominent position in a conservation area and on a major thoroughfare. However, as a result of inquiries made with the planning officer at Braintree District Council, we were advised that the prior approval for the change of use came within permitted development rights, policy ADM 21. And as such, Witham Town Council was obliged to offer no objection, despite the misgivings of members of the Town Council Planning Applications and Transport Committee. A similar situation arose under a subsequent application, number 19-01159 FUL, with regard to fenestration and an additional staircase. But in the light of the previous fait accompli, whereby we were obliged to offer no objection under a change of use prior approval, Witham Town Council offered the same decision, although with the caveat that this was subject to an archaeological survey. However, over the festive period at the end of 2019, the further application number 19-02200 FUL which is the subject of this representation, was received. This application referenced the addition of another flat, bringing the total number of dwellings to 11. Due to the timing of the receipt of this application, no meeting of the Witham Town Council Planning Applications and Transport Committee was programmed to take place prior to Braintree District Council's deadline for receipt of recommendations from third parties. Hence, given the concerns previously raised by members with regard to overdevelopment of the site in question, it was considered by the chairman of the Witham Town Council Planning Applications and Transport Committee, utilising his delegated powers, that the addition of an 11th dwelling further constituted overmassing of the site. Therefore, Witham Town Council reiterates its position made in writing on 3rd January 2020 and recommends refusal of application number 19-02200 on the grounds of overmassing of this prominent site in a conservation area. And that's from Councillor John Goodman, Chairman of the Planning Applications and Transport Committee of Witham Town Council. That's the end of the statement, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. And we have no other statements on this application, so I'll go straight to the officer, and it's going to be presented by Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. Hopefully a bit more of a straightforward application for you. Let me just share my screen. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, so we're looking at the application for alterations to the roof of Warwick House to form one bedroom flat together with the creation of additional parking space. And that's at 48 Collingwood Road in Witham. So before I discuss the location plan, it's been mentioned in the public question time that the building has history. So the building was previously offices, but benefited from prior approval to change to 10 residential flats. A further application was also submitted for some minor alterations to the building, which I'll discuss as we go through the presentation. So what the application is effectively seeking to do now is create an 11th unit at the site by altering the rear extension. So the site location plan, just for some context, so the site is edged in red, Warwick House is in blue, the conservation area sort of runs this side of the railway and down there. And yeah, as I say, the railway itself is in close proximity, and similarly the station as well. So it is a very accessible location. Moving on to slide 3. So just to briefly show you the existing block plan that was approved as part of the Cooper application. So you can see the footprint of the building, and you can also see the 11 parking spaces, and you can also see the garden area to the rear, which is 500 square meters approximately. So you notice the only change on the block plan is the addition of that 12th parking space, which is over here. Everything else remains the same. In terms of the existing floor plans, so this is what was approved as part of the Cooper application. So you can see that the accommodation at the moment is over 2 floors and the separate garage. There's no first floor accommodation in the rear element at the moment. In terms of the proposal, moving on to slide 6, you can see that what's being created actually is the bathroom of this unit has been slightly reconfigured to enable an internal staircase, which then serves the flat, which is being created in a amended roof form for a rear extension. So it's a 1-bedroom flat. So unlike the Cooper application, where officers couldn't take into account the quality of the accommodation that was sought, we can with this one. So just picking up a few points raised in the report, the flat can provide 47.8 square metres of floor space, which is over and above the 37 square metre requirement in the nationally described space standards. The plan also shows that the flat would have an internal ceiling height of 2.3 metres for 31 square metres of the total floor area. The technical guidance requires that 75% of the floor area be over 2.3 metres. So in this case, the flat would just fall below the requirement for the internal height. However, taking into account that the floor area exceeds the minimum threshold by a good 10 square metres, officers consider the failure to comply with the 75% over 2.3 metres in height is not considered to be harmful to the amenity that would be enjoyed for future occupiers, or if this was to be allowed. In terms of light and outlook, the flat would be served by a large window in the main living area, and that's up here. While there'd be 4 Velux windows, which you'll see more clearly on the elevation plans in a minute, but that will provide light to some of the other rooms, like the bedroom, the ensuite, and the sort of directly to the kitchen areas. So there will be some outlook and a good level of natural light for any future occupier. So overall, while the unit is relatively compact, it mostly complies with the technical guidance to provide a good standard of living accommodation and a moderate outlook. Okay, moving on to slide 7. So the front of the building, you can see that remains unchanged, although I will point out that the roof light at the front and those 2 circular windows at the top were approved as part of the amendment application I referred to earlier. So when we see the site photos, you'll see that there is no window there and no roof light at the moment, but for the purposes of this presentation, the existing elevations incorporate those works, those alteration works that have been approved. So what we're concentrating on then for this proposal is this rear element here. So you can see what it looks like at the moment. And now you can see what it looks like as proposed. So the roof form has changed quite considerably, but not so significantly that it's out of keeping or out of scale with what the building is. You'll see on the next slide that another side view, if you like, and the rear view of the existing situation at the moment with the chimney, the small chimney. And then obviously what we're looking at actually from the back doesn't really change too much. It's just obviously regularising that roof form, inserting that that primary outlook window that I referred to, and some of the dormer windows, which I also referred to. So you can see there's not a significant change. Yes, there is obviously an increase in height of the roof and a bit deeper, but yeah, the change isn't so significant. Now, obviously, you'll see in the report that there were concerns raised by the historic building consultant and similarly Witham Town Council in respect to the enlargement of the roof form, considering it no development of the site and causing less than substantial harm to the conservation area. And concerns were also lost with respect to the loss of this chimney. What I would say is that the historic buildings consultant does acknowledge that the extension wouldn't be directly visible from the front of the street scene. Officers have carefully considered the application and accept the roof extension would have a bulkier appearance when compared to the original roof form, but that it would not be to a degree which could be considered to be overdevelopment of the building due to its size, design, and lack of prominence in the conservation area. We'll see that in the site photos in a minute. Also, officers acknowledge that the loss of the chimney is regrettable. However, due to its single-storey height, its overall visibility is very limited. In any case, as the building is not listed, this could be removed at any time without permission. I would just conclude that by saying officers accept there will be some heritage harm, but consider this to be at a very low level. And in any case, this harm must be weighed in the planning balance at the end of the report. Now, just taking you through some of the site photos, you can see the building has quite an interesting character. And I note that the circular windows are not there, and the roof lights similarly, as I discussed. It's just looking at the parking area at the side of the property. Moving on to slide 13, another view of the front of the site taken from the other side of the road. You can just semi-see the rear extension, although be fleeting views as you were driving past. Some of the drone footage, I imagine, submitted in support of the application just gives you a bit more of a flavour of the site and its parking and its grounds from the front. Similarly, a shot from the back, so you can see the existing extension as it is at the moment and the original form of the building. And this is an image taken a bit further down Collingwood Road. So the site is over here. So I guess in fleeting views, when you drive past, you might be able to see that if you were looking, but certainly it's not overly prominent in the street scene. So just to sum up then, the proposal would deliver a number of benefits. It's one new small unit towards a housing supply, which would provide an acceptable level of amenity for future occupiers. There would also be limited social and economic benefits. And I think probably the biggest selling point of this is that it's in a highly sustainable location, as I discussed. There would be a low level of less than substantial harm to the conservation area from an overdevelopment of the site. Obviously, members will be well aware, but the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year land supply, so our current position is 4.52 years. So we have to consider the proposal and the tilted balance in favour of development. And we have to consider whether the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Now, taking into account those benefits and taking into account the harm, officers have come to the view that the benefits would outweigh the limited harms in the tilted balance, and subsequently the application recommendation before members this evening is to approve. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Well, I know this site very well, having been walking past it either to or from school or to or from the railway station for 50 years. So it's a lovely building, actually, in the town centre. The officer is absolutely right. It's in an incredibly sustainable location. Even average walking speed is about 2 minutes from the railway station. It's no more than 4 minutes from the town centre to the shops. It's on a bus route. I'm a very big supporter of reusing buildings where we can to provide more residential. I think this one has been done well. There are no objections, interestingly, from neighbouring residential properties. So there are properties both opposite and either side. There's no objections from them. I take the point that the town council have raised, but in this instance, this change is at the back of the property. And the previous changes, as they pointed out, could be done under permitted development. So there wasn't any control over that. So I think taking all things into consideration and given that the sustainable location and the very welcome reuse of an existing building to provide residential accommodation, I'm very happy to move officer recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Does that find a seconder before I move on?
Councillor Cunningham, happy to second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mann, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Applaud everything that Councillor Abbott said. Most sustainable location, doesn't appear to have in any way a sort of a detrimental effect on the conservation area or the street scene. Very happy to support, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mann. Does anyone else wish to speak? No. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application. It's been moved by Councillor Abbott and seconded by Councillor Cunningham. I'm now going to put this to the vote as no one else wishes to speak. Thank you. Councillor Abbott?
For.
Councillor Bowers?
For.
Councillor Cunningham?
For.
Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Johnson?
For.
Councillor Mann?
For.
Councillor Monday?
For.
Councillor Parker?
For.
Councillor Ritchie?
For.
Councillor Mrs Spray?
For.
Councillor Unsworth?
For.
Councillor Wrench?
For.
Thank you, members. That has been approved unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. Now, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I'm going to take item E next before item D. And the item E is the application for 2000440 variation, land rear of Tay Road, Earls Cone. And it can be found on pages 67 to 86. And we do have a statement on this application, members. And the statement is from Mr. Richard Farnes for the Tay Road Residents Group, and they are objecting. And this also is going to be read by Alison. Alison, I'm sorry I've changed the order, but I do hope I haven't muddled you.
No, thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement. When the original application for this development was given outline planning permission in February 2019, several councillors spoke of the hazards of the junction of Tay Road and the A1124, which would have to be negotiated by every vehicle entering and exiting the site. One councillor even admitted that when she turned at the junction in her car, she would just go for it and hope for the best. But despite fierce local opposition to willfully increasing traffic movements here by permitting the development, councillors felt that they could not refuse planning permission because Essex Highways had not raised concerns. Listed buildings blocking the view at this T-junction mean that a driver moving both into and out of Tay Road has to make a 90-degree turn, virtually blind to oncoming traffic. At exactly the same point, there is no footway for several metres on either side of Tay Road, just where it narrows to a single carriageway, meaning that pedestrians are walking in the road just where vehicles swing around a blind corner into their path. At the Planning Committee, it was noted that if work at the development site were allowed to commence any time before 9 AM, there would be delivery vehicles, HGVs and heavy plant, as well as contractors' cars and vans, swinging round this blind corner into the path of parents with children on their way to school. The vast majority of these drivers would not be familiar with the hazards and difficulties of this junction. Local residents bear witness to near misses and prangs quite regularly, but because no one has been killed or seriously injured here for some years, highways have not registered it as a dangerous junction. The committee sensibly decided that if outline planning permission were to be granted, there would be a stipulation to begin working hours slightly later, at 9 AM, to reduce the catastrophic possibility of a child or other pedestrian being hit. That stipulation is now being challenged by a developer who has little or no local knowledge of the situation and is clearly unaware of the very serious dangers here. Councillors are thus making a simple choice between acceding to the wishes of a developer who doesn't know the area or upholding the safety of children and families who live here. To make the wrong decision could have terrible consequences. And that's by Mr. Richard Farnes of the Tay Road Residents Group. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Alison. And the presentation, I have no more speakers. The presentation is going to be made by Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Then bear with me while I just quickly share my screen. Okay, so the application before us this evening is to vary condition 7, which refers to the hours of operation for planning permission 18/00214/OUT, which was granted on the 20th of May 2019, which was for the erection of 23 detached and semi-detached dwellings and associated infrastructure, parking, amenity space, etc. So I will cover, I know the report covers this, but I will go through it in detail as well, just for the absolute avoidance of doubt. The site operation continue on. The proposal is to allow the site operation to commence at 8 a.m. Monday to Friday, as opposed to 9 a.m. Monday to Friday. So before I go into the background, just to remind members of where the site is. Most of you, I believe, were part of the planning committee last year in February that approved the application. The junction that's referred to at public question time is this one, with Tay Road and the A1124. The site is accessed from Lowfields, but to get to the site, as part of the conditions on the outline, the delivery vehicles would have to use this junction, opposed to any entering from the other side of the site or the other direction. Okay, so the background has been raised at public question time, but I'll just repeat. So the outline application was brought forward to members on 26th of February committee with a recommendation of approval, subject to a number of conditions. Condition 7 related to hours of working and was originally reported in line with the standard condition from environmental health that there be no site clearance, demolition or construction work on the site, including starting of machinery and delivery of materials outside of the following times. And the key point is Monday to Friday, 8 till 6. Now, at the planning committee, members resolved to grant planning permission subject to the amendment of condition 7 to a 9 a.m. start rather than 8 a.m. start. So the condition was subsequently amended, as you can see on the slide in front of you on slide 4. And the rationale, watching the webcast back, was to avoid disruption at peak times to local residents, as vehicles would be required to access the site via residential roads, while also possibly reducing the intensity of the use of the Tay Road and Upper Holt junction. Or intensive, I should say. Right, so moving on to slide 5. So the proposal, so for the avoidance of doubt, so this application seeks to move or change the condition back, if you like, to what officers previously recommended. So from 9 a.m. to 8 a.m. start during the week. Note that the Saturday and public holiday times are not proposed to change. Okay, so you'll have seen and heard of public question time. There are a number of concerns raised about this change, and obviously some of these were raised at the committee, as I've just discussed. But some of these include the increased traffic at peak times and subsequent impact on the Tay Road and Upper Holt Street junction, which is A1124, and the suitability of that junction to contain the additional traffic, especially HGVs. Pedestrian and child safety. It is correct that there is a small section of Tay Road where it doesn't have a footpath. The parked vehicles causing disturbance, so while they're waiting to go on the site at peak periods, and sort of more general disturbance from the construction works. So reviewing the change, I think it's first important to look at the justification why the developer wants to change it back. So these are the reasons that they've set out. So they believe that changing the condition will actually result in a number of benefits. It would enable the construction to be completed quicker, thus avoiding prolonged disturbance to residents. Now, officers consider this to be a fairly reasonable comment, albeit, we acknowledge that there is a benefit also to the developer for an earlier completion, but equally it could also mean a quicker delivery of much needed houses in the district. So I suppose there's potentially benefits all round there. There would be less delivery / worker vehicles waiting on nearby roads for the site to open. Officers believe, again, this is a fair comment, the construction industry usually start early. With a 9 a.m. start time, it's likely that more vehicles will park on surrounding roads waiting to access the site. In peak periods, this may cause additional disruption. With an 8 a.m. start, most vehicles will be out of the way, by the time peak times come, if you like. Better enable staggered deliveries. This is a point that I'll refer to later, but this is accurate insofar as that there will be more time, in theory, for deliveries to take place during the day. And the final, the second to last point, there is a national drive for flexible working that the developer points out. And as I've covered in the report, this is accurate and reflects the current situation that we find ourselves in with COVID-19. Often any changes will go beyond what the council would consider acceptable based on what the government are saying, but here we're just seeking to amend the condition actually to be in line with what we usually would impose anyway. And finally, amenities are protected by other conditions as well, and I'll cover this in a minute. Actually, in the next slide. So moving to slide 8. So I just want to confirm that we are seeking to reimpose the condition, which is condition 10, which is on page 81 of the committee report. But just to point out that hours of working is not the only condition designed to protect neighbour amenity. One such condition is the construction method statement, which has not yet been discharged, but will require the developer set out a number of key principles, including the staging of delivery times, and this would obviously to avoid too many HGVs accessing the site at any one time, the parking on the site and perhaps around the site, measures to control dust and dirt, safe access to the site, and as I sort of intimated previously, there is a sort of bespoke restriction here about HGVs accessing the site from the south and restrictions on that access. So just for members' information, that once officers receive a construction method statement, it's sent to the Essex Highways and the Environmental Health Officer to rigorously assess what is being proposed and actually determine whether or not it is appropriate for the local area. So thinking about the implications of the change. So as I've just said, both Essex Highways and Environmental Health Officer have no objection to this application, and they would be the key people to speak to. So weighing up all the factors, officers consider that the applicant has raised a number of valid justifications to lower the hours of working to 8 a.m. rather than 9 a.m. This, coupled with the other conditions to protect neighbouring amenity as discussed, no statutory constitutional objection, and the government drive to extend working hours for developers on sites weigh significantly in favour of the proposed variation. As such, while officers acknowledge the concerns of residents and members previously, officers have taken the view in this case that the change would not be sufficiently harmful to any of the previously identified factors to justify refusing the variation in this case. And as such, the recommendation before members tonight is for the approval of the application. And obviously, officers are quite mindful that we're happy to work with our members to try and reduce any impacts as far as possible from this development. And what we could do, if members are minded, is include a suitably worded informative to supplement the construction method statement to ensure like deliveries are suitably managed. But I'll leave that for members to decide. One very final point is that the reserve matters application has been submitted for this site. It's currently with officers in negotiations to improve the design. But that, I imagine that will come forward at some point this year for members to decide upon. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Park. No, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Sorry, I'm reading upside down.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you. Members will remember, or may remember, certainly those who were on the planning committee last year when this came up, that I spoke and voted against this outline application, and I did so on highways grounds because, quite frankly, Tay Road is, well, to say it's difficult to negotiate is an understatement, really. Cars park on either side, and effectively that reduces it to a single lane road, and to go up and down you find yourself dodging in and out of spaces in order to let something coming towards you go through. And the junction at the top between Tay Road and Holt Street is hazardous. It is a really awful junction. Construction traffic is going to struggle getting through, and pedestrians, and especially children going to school, are going to be put at risk. That was my view at the time, and it remains my view. Now, I appreciate that the committee had a very difficult time refusing this because there were no objections from highways, and that's, you know, a key point. It is virtually impossible for a planning committee to refuse an application on highways grounds when highways don't object. So I understand that. So it was approved, but with this condition attached that we would have a later start time, and that was done for a reason. It was to try and reduce the hazardous impact of construction traffic on pedestrians. There is not a continuous footway at the top of Tay Road out onto the main road, and actually when you turn the corner onto the main road there's no footway at all. So I didn't think it was unreasonable to have that condition to try and mitigate the, as I saw it, the rather dangerous highways situation. Now, I appreciate that the government are pushing hard for flexibility around work on sites, and when I say pushing hard, they've issued guidelines, but with a very strong backup message that local authorities are being expected to support longer working hours and should not refuse those requests unreasonably. But they have said that, you know, local considerations can be taken into account. And I do think this is one such case where local opinion does actually know best. I appreciate that officers have a different view. Also pleased to hear Matt say that, you know, if this does go through this evening, that deliveries could be managed, and officers are happy to work with, you know, with the site manager to organise that. But I don't think it's a great deal to ask in this particular situation that we have a later start time. I really don't. That condition was put there by the planning committee at the time for a reason, and I think it should stand. So I'm afraid, Madam Chairman, I can't support this, and I would move refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does it find a seconder before I move on?
Councillor Frankie Ritchie will second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Mann, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I noticed there is no objection from the parish council, who would consider themselves, I think, a source of local knowledge. So that that might be an indication. And again, as Councillor Sprayer said, there is no objection from County Council Highways. And in the light of government guidance that has just been issued, I would think that this is in fact a reasonable reasonable request, and I should support officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you. Yes, I obviously remember this application extremely well. And the thing that concerned me about it at the time was that the access to the site was down a residential street. In addition, obviously, the fact that children walk to school along a road that ends up having no footpath at the most dangerous place. And I just could envisage lorries turning up with delivering concrete or removing spoil just at the same time when everyone was trying to get to work or people were trying to walk children to school. And it was the thing that was concerning me was the deliveries, the HGVs trying to access the site between 8 and 9 o'clock. And so that's why I thought that was the best way of controlling that. But I just wanted to ask the officers, I noticed that the construction method statement, would that include any details on when deliveries or HGV deliveries could be made? Could I ask that question, please?
Yes, Chris is going to answer that.
Thank you, Councillor Scattergood. Thank you, Councillor Parker, for the question. I was actually, you've preempted a point that I wanted to come back on, because I obviously recognise the concerns that members are raising in terms of HGV. I think there's two issues at stake here. One is the wider working hours condition, which is sought to be varied, and the second point is in relation to the very specific concerns and the local concerns from residents around HGV traffic and how it accesses the actual site. So obviously, as Matt's referred to within the presentation, we do have condition 10 as recommended, which relates to the construction method statement. There are some provisions within that which specify in a prescriptive way how that discharge of condition application should come forward and what details should come forward within it. I would be minded to say, if members are concerned about this, if it would assist in alleviating and mitigating some of the concerns that would be raised, that potentially that the wording of that condition could be made more prescriptive around this particular point. In terms of the timing, but specifically in terms of HGV traffic, notwithstanding what the condition is, what the application is seeking to vary, which is the working hours condition, which, as Matt has referred to and is referred within the report, is the more general, how the site actually, the time and the finish time of when construction work can actually start on site. So I think from officers' perspective, we would have control through condition 10 in terms of how those other elements of the operation of the construction process would take place. If members felt strongly, my advice would be we could strengthen the wording of condition 10 to include something around that. In terms of the working hours point, as set out in the report and has been referred to by members, obviously aware of the local concern, there is, as referred to within the debate, there is a very strong push from the government around this particular point due to the COVID-19 situation. We have received a number of requests from different developers all across the district that we will be in the process of going back to give some further advice and clarify what information we require from them. But this is going to be a fairly common request across the district, given the amount of development that we have going on up and down the piece, and the government have made it clear that in order for construction sites to operate safely, in order that social distancing can be respected, potentially allowing shift patterns of work, those normal hours that are imposed very reasonably by local planning authorities to try to mitigate the harm of construction process, that they are effectively extended. Matt's report, and I think it's page 75 of the agenda, actually includes an extracted quote from the ministerial statements and with the working hours extending up to 9 p.m. Rather unhelpfully, it doesn't specify the start time, which is usually the key thing really with the construction industry. Is they tend to start and operate earlier and finish earlier, unless you're talking about a very urban location or it's a major infrastructure project. So I think there are two issues here. One is the actual construction hours themselves in terms of when workers would be on the site and operating, and two, the specific point around the HGVs. But as I said, if members feel strongly on that particular point, my advice would be that we could amend and strengthen condition 10 around HGVs and potentially include further strengthening around the timing of those movements as well. So it's something that would be prescriptive within the wording of the condition. So hopefully Councillor Parker, that answers the question and assist members in the consideration of this application.
Thank you, Chris. Matthew would like to come back on a point.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Echo what Chris said, but just on the bottom of page 77 of the report, I just spotted that it should be, the recommendation should be per 106 or permitted subject to section 106. So what that basically means is because the original outline consent had the section 106, which obviously secured a number of benefits for the area and on the site, that will need to be transferred across to this variation, which effectively forms a new permission. So just to make members aware that if we do approve the application this evening, it should be subject to agreeing a deed of variation to the section 106. Thank you.
Matthew, thank you. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm afraid I have to fall on the side of Councillor Spray on this request for variation. The condition to impose those working times were done so in all good faith to give some reassurance back to the residents that we had, as far as a planning authority, notwithstanding no objection from the Essex County Council, at least taken some of their concerns to heart. And some of those concerns were actually quite real. And if you visited that area or are familiar with that area, as I'm sure many of us are, turning out of that junction, you run the gauntlet. You take a risk in turning out of that junction. There is no other way to say it. But by way of mitigation, we felt as a planning committee that that was a reasonable and practical measure to take. But whilst I completely understand that whilst we're trying to get construction restarted again, I think introducing an earlier start time so that construction can start earlier, I think just goes against the moral element of how we granted permission for this development in the first place. My other comment would be, whilst I understand construction companies want to try and get staff mobilised earlier whilst trying to take into consideration new measures for COVID-19. I think this is just a kind of a play on the back of that to just impose earlier HGV movements, lorry movements, deliveries that could impact or have a consequence on the area. Hence, I'm happy to support Councillor Spray's recommendation not to approve. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Unsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Given the conversations we've just had on the previous application about pedestrian and child safety, this seems a little at odds. I would suggest that an extra hour is not a bad thing, but if it was supported by an amendment to condition 10 that limited the weight of the vehicles that can come in before 9 o'clock, such that they're HGVs and therefore condition 10 is made a bit more robust, that this is probably a good thing. It gets the housing delivered, it meets the government criteria, it meets the government guidelines. So I would suggest that if we did prove it, that we would put a condition on there to limit the weight of vehicles that comes in before 9 o'clock.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to speak? Well, I have a motion on the table. I have a motion to refuse. The motion was moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Ritchie. I'm going to take that motion first, members. This is to refuse. Councillor Abbott.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
Against.
Councillor Cunningham.
Against.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Mann.
Against.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Parker.
Against.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs Spray.
For.
Councillor Unsworth.
Against.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. 2, 3, 6. 6. I have a casting vote on this one. I am going to vote against and then get someone to move the substantive measure.
Madam Chairman, Councillor Unsworth, I'll move the substantive motion with the condition that no vehicles above, say, 7.5 tonnes are allowed before 9 o'clock.
Can I confirm with officers if this is acceptable, possible, please? This is coming back to us on this one.
I apologise, Councillor Scattergood. My audio cut out on the last part of Councillor Unsworth's statement there, so I got 7.5, but I missed the rest of the statement that you just said.
7.5 tonne. So it limits the weight of the vehicles that come on before 9 o'clock, and that could be possibly added to, or should be added to, condition 10 as part of the construction plan.
Madam Chairman, if it's possible, could I just confer with Matt on that, just so we can give some clear advice on that? Could I just ask for a couple of minutes, just as a brief adjournment on that point?
Members, we would usually adjourn for this discussion. However, officers can do this in comfort. So please can I ask that you do not debate this application further. Thank you. Members, just to remind you that officers are just conferring with each other and this meeting is currently under a short adjournment. Thank you. Thank you, members, for your patience. Officers have managed to confer and will, with the Chairman's permission, answer the question that's been put by Councillor Unsworth in respect of the proposed amendment to the condition 10. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, members. Thank you for your patience on that point. So in terms of the weight restriction, Councillor Unsworth, that seems, as far as we can give advice on that matter in terms of the weight of the vehicle, it seems appropriate. In terms of the time, I would suggest that the actual time is specified as well. My only slight caveat and slight concern, just to be clear around that, is obviously we can control when deliveries are taken on the actual site itself. Obviously, if it is a public highway, there is no control that the planning authority have of a vehicle, whether or not it's an HGV or not, turning up, waiting in a particular spot to actually access the construction site. So that's my only point, I'd say, back on this, but we could certainly put the time restriction on linked with it, along with the weight of the lorry, as you've suggested. That could be strengthened with an amended condition 10, which is on page 81 of the agenda papers. So hopefully that answers the question.
Chris. Councillor Unsworth, what did you wish to come back?
No, that's fine. If we can just limit the access to the site to vehicles under 7.5 tonne before 9 o'clock in the morning, that's about as good as we can get it, isn't it?
But have you not seen the point that they could then queue on the highway and cause even more chaos? If they just can't get onto the site, we can't stop lorries driving, parking on the road. This concerns me personally.
Yeah, but we're stopping the bigger vehicles because it's likely to be smaller vans and things that come to site first. So that's really where I was trying to try and encourage.
Right, Councillor Cunningham, you wish to speak? Sorry, you've come under another message. Councillor Cunningham.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm sorry, I don't wish to be pedantic, but are we actually saying 7.5 tonnes and under, or under 7.5 tonnes? Because without wishing to be pedantic, I think 7.5 tonne is a certain type of commercial vehicle, which isn't a lorry, but it's not a light commercial transit van either. A condition of not allowing 7.5 tonne vehicle would be disproportionate. I may be alone in my view, but I would prefer the term 7.5 tonne and under.
We're not getting anywhere, are we?
I'm quite happy with that. That makes sense to me.
So would you move something formally then, please, Councillor?
We accept officer recommendation with condition 10 reinforced that no vehicle with under 7.5 tonne and under is allowed on the site before 9 o'clock or until after 9 o'clock. Sorry, wrong way around. So vehicles under 7.5 tonne can get on the site from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, but no vehicle over 7.5 tonne can get on the site until after 9 o'clock.
You've just changed it to over. That's what I was querying that. Yes, okay, fine. Does that find a seconder before I move on, please?
Seconded, Madam Chairman.
Who's that?
Sorry, Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Councillor. It's just, yes, okay, fine. We have a motion on the table I have to take first. I've done that, sorry. I'm getting tired as well. So it has been moved and said we grant this application with the improvement to condition 10, stating that no traffic over the 7.5 tonnes can enter the site before 9 o'clock in the morning. Is everybody clear? Right. I'm going to put that to the vote. Councillor Abbott.
Abstain.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson,
4.
Councillor Mann,
4.
Councillor Monday,
4.
Councillor Mrs Parker,
4.
Councillor Ritchie,
Against.
Councillor Mrs Spray,
Against.
Councillor Unsworth,
For.
Councillor Wrench.
Against.
That application has been granted, members. Thank you very much indeed. It has been requested that we take a 10-minute break, and I think it would be a very good idea because my eyes are closing, and then we will then move on to item D when we return. So we're going to take 10 minutes.
Okay.
Chairman, sorry, I can hear Councillor Monday. Chairman, could I invite Councillor Monday because he's declared an interest in 5D, that he retires from the meeting now.
Yes.
And all other members, we are now going to proceed to a short adjournment. By my timing, it's 9:55. So could members please make sure they are back with us at 5 minutes past 10. If you are remaining on the call, then please make sure your microphones are switched off, and we will make sure that all members are present when they return. So webcasting officer, could you kindly put us to adjournment, please?
The broadcast is now started.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members. It is now 5 minutes past 10. I can confirm that we have completed a 10-minute adjournment, and in that adjournment period, Councillor Munday has left this meeting, also Councillor Unsworth, and he gives his apologies. Officer Matt Wild has also left the meeting because he's completed his business items. So this committee now consists of Councillors Abbott, Bowers, Cunningham, Horner, Johnson, Mann, Parker, Ritchie, Scattergood, Spray and Wrench. This meeting is still quorate, Chairman. I now hand back to you for the next business item, which is agenda item 5D. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Can someone move standing orders so that we can continue this meeting after 10:15, please?
Move, Madam Chairman. Councillor
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. Now we move. Oh, I don't think I need to put that to the vote. We now move on to application D, which is application 2000388 land adjacent to South Broughton Drive, Halstead. I do not have any statements on this application, and the presentation is going to be made by Christopher Padgey. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, members. Just bear with me while I share my screen. I have a short presentation for you. So the application seeks permission, so for temporary planning permission for up to a period of 2 years for the erection of temporary site hoardings for the site, and the site is land adjacent south of Broughton Drive in Halstead. So members will be very familiar with this site. You have Broughton Drive and Butler Road. You have the Butler Road car park, as you can see, just off the high street. You have the industrial estate there to the north, and you have residential properties, including the public house on the left-hand side of that map. So members will be aware from the planning history, planning permission was previously granted on this site for a community centre building. That permission has lapsed. But the application before us, which has been submitted, is to erect a hoarding around the perimeter of the site. So if I move on from the location plan to the hoarding details, I'll just wait 1 second because in preparation for this meeting, this slide took a little while just to appear. So hopefully members can all see this. So it has the area hatched in blue, and you can just see the dotted blue line indicates around the perimeter of the site the area of where the hoarding would be erected. So the hoarding would be 2.4 metres in height, and it is proposed for a temporary period of 2 years. The justification for this coming forward, as within the supporting documentation that's been submitted, is there is a known contamination issue on the actual site itself, which needs to be regularised. So the hoarding is there to enclose and provide protection on the site for a limited period of time while that work to decontaminate the site is undertaken. There's also the ground on the site, although it's open at the moment, and I've got a few photographs just to run through. It is fairly uneven. There's also evidence of former buildings and building materials on the site. So for the safety of the public and to enable that decontamination to take place, it's proposed to erect the hoarding around the perimeter of the site. So just a few photographs. You can see on the right hand side, you can just see Butler Road car park, and then you can see the start of the site, which is fairly overgrown, and you can see the industrial units on the other side. A view slightly further down Butler Road, looking back. So again, you can just about see the cars parked, not in the foreground, but in the back of the photograph. That's where the car park is. Moving on to Broughton Drive, and you can see the residential flats on the other side of the site. Again, you can see the overgrown nature. And looking back, so you can see the residential properties off of Butler Road, and I think you can just make the pub out there as well, and a slightly different view. So in this particular case, we acknowledge, and as highlighted within the report, the proposal, as confirmed by our heritage advisor, would result in less than substantial harm, but very much at the lower end of that scale of harm. to the setting of the adjacent conservation area. We also feel, in terms of the character area, that there would be some short-term harm to the character and appearance of the street because of the erection of the hoarding. It is considered acceptable from a public safety perspective while remediation works are carried out on the site. The applicant says they want to undertake first before coming forward with new plans for the development of that site for community purposes. From officers' perspective, the harms that have been identified would not outweigh the benefits, and therefore the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions, and that includes, I think, condition 3, which was at the request of our ecology officer to provide safe egress into the site and actually exit from the site for hedgehogs, which is a new thing that obviously we're trying to look at in terms of ecology. So subject to those conditions and for a time limited period, the proposal was considered acceptable in this case. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Craig. The first person wishing to speak is Councillor Mann. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. Temporary period of 2 years required for the safety of the public in the short term while the decontamination goes on. Happy to move officer's recommendation with conditions.
Thank you, Councillor. Does it find a seconder before I move on?
Councillor.
Councillor, you seconding it?
Yes.
And you have indicated you wish to speak, so would you like to speak?
Please, Madam Chairman. Just a very quick, well, a couple of questions, but it might be one depending on what the answer is from Chris. Chris, are we able to add further conditions to the hoarding itself, or are we kind of fairly limited as to what we can condition with hoarding and hoarding type?
Perhaps it might be helpful if you gave Chris an idea of what you wanted to.
Sure. Okay. So off of the back of that, my second question was going to be, could we condition, just to kind of alleviate some of the eyesore? A lot of construction companies actually wrap or vinyl a street scene or trees or hedgerows or a town scene on hoarding, just to kind of take the eyesore off. I just wondered if we could condition that, just bearing in mind it's going to be there for a length of time.
Thank you, Councillor Scattergood. Thank you, Councillor Ritchie, for the question. It would be within members' ability to add a further condition on it. I understand, I think that it's intended to be painted a light grey colour, so it's obviously be constructed primarily out of wood with the posts. So there would be a continuous appearance around the boundary of the actual site. I suppose from the applicant's perspective, and bearing in mind the future intended community use, there is an issue here as well in terms of cost, that actually any additional wrap around the hoarding of the site would be an additional cost for the applicant to bear, during that period of time. So members could impose a condition in that regard. From officers' perspective, I think we're quite comfortable that actually, as long as the painted colour is acceptable, which I think a light grey would be for the actual site, that would alleviate our concerns. But if members feel strongly, then obviously additional conditions or an additional condition could be imposed in this case. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Ritchie's nodding his head, so I think he's saying, good. What about graffiti, Chris? Could we condition that any graffiti has to be removed? Because that is what's unsightly more than anything on these kind of things.
Again, we could add a actual condition around the maintenance of the hoarding to make sure that it was inspected regularly and any graffiti or fly posters or something like that was regularly removed and maintained. Again, there would obviously be the issue of additional costs for the applicant, but again, if members felt strongly that it was maintained, we could add a condition to that effect. I could come up with some suitably worded wording for that condition, I'm sure. So again, if members feel strongly, we could impose that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mann, you moved it. Do you feel strongly at all about anything like this?
A note to applicant, I think, would be sufficient.
A note to applicant. Okay, fine. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item? Well, it has been moved by Councillor Mann and seconded by Councillor Ritchie with an informative to the applicant to keep it, I presume, presentable might be a sort of suitable wording. I'm not sure. To keep it neat and tidy. All those in favour, and I'm coming to go to the vote now. Councillor Abbott.
4.
Councillor Bowers.
4.
Councillor Cunningham.
4.
Councillor Horner.
4.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson, you've got your microphone off.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
4.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you, Councillor. That has been agreed unanimously. Thank you, members. That now brings us on to the items part B. And the first, I have got speakers on the 3 items that we've got to discuss this evening. And the first item is item 19022297/ADV, land off Western Road, Silver End. And I have a statement from Mr. Michael Ward, who is the agent on behalf of Red Row Homes. And once again, will be read by Alison. Alison, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of Red Row Homes, thank you members for taking the time to consider this application tonight. As presented by your officer, this application originally sought advertisement consent for the erection of an illuminated advert comprising the word Red Row and the Red Row Homes logo to promote the new housing development that is currently under construction by Red Row. Following discussions with your officer, Red Row is now seeking advertisement consent to retain the sign that has been erected at the site in its current form, but with the illumination turned off. As set out in your officer's report, when considering applications for advertisement consent, local planning authorities are required under the advertisement regulations to consider the issues of amenity and public safety, taking into account the provisions of any development plan policies that are material and any other relevant factors which are specifically relevant to amenity and public safety. The Red Row letters sign is considered by Red Row to be an important element of the company's marketing and advertising initiative to help support the sale of its new homes at the site. As set out by your officer, the sign itself is considered to be of a reasonable scale and appearance, and with the illumination turned off, will not result in undue harm to amenity or public safety, such that would warrant the refusal of advertisement consent. The Highway Authority has raised no objection to the sign, and your officer has also made clear the proposal in its amended form will not result in any harm to the setting or character of the nearby listed building at Bowers Hall, or have any intervisibility from the Silver End Conservation Area. The sign is to be situated on the land for a temporary period whilst the construction and sale of the new homes is taking place, after which it will be removed. Given the present circumstances and the recent pause in construction work because of the COVID-19 lockdown, it is vitally important, now more than ever, that new housing developments are supported by appropriate advertising and signage to promote the homes that are being built and to support sales, and this in turn is critical to enabling important housing delivery on sites such as this to continue. We therefore respectfully ask members that members accept their officer's recommendation and grant advertisement consent for this advert. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. And this presentation is going to be made by Neil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies for that delay. So this is an application for the retention of the sign that's in place on the development site at Western Road, as we heard at Silver End. Just to confirm, so when it was originally, the application was submitted, the application was for one illuminated advertisement, and that's how it was advertised or publicised.
Neil, we do not have any pictures. I don't have a picture coming up, sorry. I don't know about other people. But
No, it's just a black.
Thank
No
you.
pictures.
No, thank you.
See that? Yeah. No. Yeah, okay. I'll send it to you.
Members, officers are just finding a workaround. Unfortunately, Neil has had problems with sharing his presentation. So he's just emailed his presentation to Chris Padgey. So we're hoping that Chris Padgey can share his screen with you, and then Neil will still remain talking to the presentation. So if you can just bear with us for one moment, we'll be most grateful. Thank you.
Apologies for that, members. Let me see if I have better luck. Bear with me. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. At which point,
can.
Okay, I'll turn my mic off and I'll pass back over to Neil, and I'll
So apologies for that, members. So just move on to slide 2, Chris, please. So when the application was originally submitted, this was an application for one illuminated advertisement. And then, as you heard at question time, officers raised concerns about the appearance of that in terms of its visual amenity. And it was agreed instead to amend the description of development. So this is now erection of a non-illuminated advert comprising the words Red Row and the Red Row Homes logo. So that's what we would be potentially approving tonight, subject to members' approval. Next slide, please, Chris. So I think we'll all be familiar with the Western Road site in Silver End. So you can see it's a large site. So this is relates to advertisements on the Western Road frontage. And you can just see towards the bottom of the slide there, I've taken an extract of the plan, and you can see the red sign, or marked with red, just to the right of the main vehicular entrance into the site. That's the location of the sign. Thank you, Chris. Next one, please. So as you can see there, the signs cover approximately 9 metres in length. So these are sort of standing, and they're about 1.5 metres or just over in height. The plan here, or the drawing here, refers to them being illuminated because that was what was submitted originally. But as we've said, the sign will actually remain as it is, but the illumination, the internal illumination within them, will be turned off, so there will be non-illuminated signs. Next slide, please, Chris. So this was a perspective view which the applicant submitted. So you can see there the sign sits just in front of the replacement hedgerow and the chestnut hurdles which have been put in as an ecology measure. And you can see Western Road just there, so quite prominent at the front of the site. Next slide, please, Chris. And then because this is a retrospective application, there's a few photos here so you can actually see how they look in situ. So these were taken earlier in the year when it was a bit more frosty than it is today. And then you just see there a sort of slightly wider view. So although quite a size, not we think unduly prominent against the sort of frontage there, the planting, the housing that's going on at the back of it. So really it was the illumination that we took issue with in terms of the appearance. Thank you, Chris. So there you can see some of the first houses which have been erected at the sites, for forming sort of the sales suite of houses at the front of the site, but again showing that the sign sort of appears against that sort of backdrop. So to our mind appears appropriate. Thank you, Chris. And again, just looking along to sort of get a sense of the cumulative impact. I mean, this application is just with regards to the actual red row sign. We'll deal with the banner advertisements next, but you can see that when we have been considering it, we have considered the cumulative impact of previously consented signs, the banner adverts, and the red row sign itself. So we have been mindful of the cumulative impact of everything. Thank you, Chris. So Historic Buildings Officer did raise a concern about the size of the sign and the illumination of it, and they were concerned about the impact on the setting of a listed building at Bower Hall and the conservation area. So I've just put this slide in. So the green line sort of shows the conservation area. So we're some way removed there. I think given the inspector didn't find favour with our argument about impact of conservation area of the housing, we're sort of mindful as officers about how anybody would view impact of an advertisement on the conservation area given the separation, except there is a potential impact on the listed building. I think the listed buildings officer did refer to size and illumination, sort of the accumulation of those factors as being a concern. So as officers, we're comfortable without the illumination. The size in itself wouldn't be harmful, such as would warrant refusal because of the impact on listed building. Thank you, Chris. So the sign is on a site where a development is being built, so it relates to an activity that's been undertaken there. As we've said, the internal illumination was considered unacceptable. So we've considered what we're able to under the advertising regs. So that's amenity and public safety only. And we consider that it is acceptable against both those measures. We have no objections from statutory consultees. So subject to conditions about the sign not being illuminated and that it only be retained for a temporary period of 5 years, we would recommend this application is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil and Chris. I have Councillor Abbott who wishes to speak. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and for the officer report. So in the report, it mentions that I have had objections. If they were taken as objections, what I had actually done was to call in the application and given reasons why. But I have taken officer advice, and officers are happy that I can both speak and vote to this application. Not least, Madam Chairman, because actually the reasons why I called it in have been addressed. And can I say to officers and to Red Row, thank you for listening. I think you've taken on board the concerns of myself and the parish council. So in a minute, I will be happy to move officer recommendation. Just by way of a little bit of background, I know BDC and ourselves contested this site when it went to appeal. It has been a huge shock to the village to lose 370 metres of mature hedge and to be replaced by what is there now. But clearly having what is quite an urban feature of a lit large advert 9 metres long on the edge of the village, actually facing open countryside, would have been sort of further wound, if you like. So I think where we are with this is very welcome. It's a good compromise. And just the final comment I would make as regards illumination, and officers will be aware of this because I've raised it with them, whilst I take the important learning point that we can't invoke ecology on an advertising application. We can invoke ecology on the conditions for the general lighting of the site. Now, the adjacent show houses have really some quite inappropriate lighting, considering this is supposed to be a back corridor that officers want to protect, but they're aware of those comments, Madam Chairman, and I'll be following that up. But anyway, in the meantime, I'm very happy to move officer recommendation as per set out to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Does it find a seconder, please?
Seconder, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. No one else seems to want to speak on this item this evening, so I will put this to the vote. Councillor Abbott?
For.
Councillor Bowers?
For.
Councillor Cunningham?
For.
Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Johnson? Councillor Johnson, you haven't got your microphone on. Thank you.
Supposed to have 4.
Thank you. Councillor Mann?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker?
For.
Councillor Ritchie?
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray?
For.
Councillor Wrench?
For.
Thank you, members. That is unanimous. That application has been approved. We now come to the next application, which is application 19-02298/ADV, land off Western Road, Silver End. And once again, we have a statement from Mr. Michael Ward, agent on behalf of Red Row Homes, which is going to be read by Alison. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On behalf of Red Row Homes, thank you members for taking the time to consider this application tonight. As presented by your officer, this application originally sought advertisement consent for the erection of 14 banner adverts, flags, on land to the north of Western Road to promote the new residential development that is currently under construction by Red Row. However, following discussions with your officer, Red Row agreed to amend the application and is now seeking advertisement consent to retain just 8 of the banners. As set out in your officer's report, when considering applications for advertisement consent, local planning authorities are required under the advertisement regulations to consider the issues of amenity and public safety, taking into account the provisions of any development plan policies that are material and any other relevant factors which are specifically relevant to amenity and public safety. The Council's Historic Buildings consultant highlighted some concerns regarding the original number of flags being proposed and their impact on the setting of the listed building at Bower Hall. Whilst your officer has made clear in his report that the flags would be separated from the listed building and would have no intervisibility from the Silver End Conservation Area, Red Row agreed to reduce the number of flags down to 8, thus ensuring there will be no harm to visual amenity or the setting and character of the listed building. Under the amended application, the nearest banner will now be located 87 metres from the boundary between Red Row's housing site and Bowers Hall, which is 27 metres more separation between the listed building site and the nearest banner. Members will note that the Highway Authority have raised no concern regarding the position of the proposed banners on highway safety grounds, and that your officer has concluded the flags are acceptable with regards to public safety. The banners are to be situated along the site frontage for a temporary period whilst the construction and sale of the new homes is taking place, and then they will be removed. Given the present circumstances and the recent pause in construction work because of the COVID-19 lockdown, it is vitally important, now more than ever, that new housing developments are supported by appropriate advertising and signage to promote the homes that are being built and to support sales, and this in turn is critical to enabling important housing delivery on sites such as this to continue. We believe the revised proposal for 8 banners represents a reasonable compromise, and we therefore respectfully ask that members accept their officer's recommendation and grant advertisement consent for these banners. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. Thank you. This one is also going to be presented by Neil. Over to you, Neil. Oh.
See that?
Yes, thank you.
Magic. Right, so I'll try and go through this fairly quickly. I think the statement was read out of question time, covered most of the key points. So originally, the application was for 14 banner adverts along Western Road. Following discussions with the applicant, it's been agreed that 8 of the banners that are there at the moment will be retained. The other 6 will be removed. I will, as we noted in the report, if we do approve this, we will ask the enforcement team to monitor the removal of the flags. Redrow have confirmed that they will instruct the contractor to remove it, and they would expect to have them removed within a month if the advertising consent is obviously approved tonight. So again, this just relates to the frontage along Western Road. So you can see here that the red sort of rectangles indicate the signs where the positions where the banner advertisements will be. So you can see 4 spaced out either side of the entrance to the site, sort of announcing the site's presence and the activity that's going on there. So here you can see a diagram of the site. So you've got the size of the letterings and the colouring and the material that's on them. So you can see those shown there. And again, because they're actually in situ, we can actually see what they look like. So you can see the banners have been erected just behind the chestnut hurdle. So this is again a photo that was taken earlier in the year. So I think this was when there was more than the 14 that had been applied for. But you can see there's quite a lot there, and I think that was the concern that officers had, that with the other advertisements that had been consented or that we were considering, that cumulatively it was too much and it was harmful to visual amenity. So that's just this photo just shows a couple of the signs which were approved previously. So you can see, as well as the Redrow letters, the sign that we just talked about previously, and the banners, we have got those sales boards as well. So we have been mindful of the sort of cumulative impact. So again, similar sort of comments from the Historic Buildings Advisor. They were concerned about the number of signs and the impact again on conservation area and listed building. We have reduced them in number. I think the Historic Buildings Officer or Advisor was suggesting that they would like to see it reduced even further in number, although I guess they would have been looking at it sort of cumulatively with the illuminated sign potentially as well. But I think as officers, we're fairly comfortable that the reduced number of 8 rather than 4 suggested by the Historic Buildings Officer is a reasonable compromise. And as you heard at question time, there is quite a significant separation from the listed building. And I think we are also conscious that obviously there is a housing development going up immediately behind the banner adverts, which does somewhat change the setting of the listed building. So I think we're mindful of that in our consideration as well. So again, been erected on the site to advertise the activity that's going on there. The 14 banners were considered unacceptable, but we think the retention of 8 banners is acceptable. But again, with a condition recommending that the consent is temporary for a period of 5 years to coincide hopefully with the construction and build out of the site. So again, officers would recommend this application for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, happily I can refer to my previous comments and my previous reasons for calling, and once again thank officers for all they've done on this. The entrance to Silver End, as I say, has been dramatically changed, and we were in a situation where we had more flags than trees that had been left after the destruction of our hedge. I think this is a reasonable compromise. I mean, personally, I would have liked to see even less, but I think given the circumstances, a reasonable compromise. Although we do have to bear in mind that these are in addition to the 2 V hoardings, which themselves have flags on, so there'll still be plenty of Red Row adverts there. I think what is encouraging is that compromise has been reached, and also that the nearest flag has been moved further from the listed building, which I think largely satisfies the historic buildings consultant. So again, thank you to the officers. You've met my reasons for calling it in, and I'm happy to move officer recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Does it find a seconder?
Second, Chairman, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. No one else wishes to speak? Well, it has been moved and second that we grant this application. I'll now go through the voting process. Councillor Abbott?
For.
Councillor Bowers?
For.
Councillor Cunningham?
For.
Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Johnson?
For.
Councillor Mann?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker?
For.
Councillor Ritchie?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray?
For.
Councillor Wrench?
For.
Thank you, members. That is also unanimous. Thank you, members, and thank you, Neil. We come now to the final application this evening. This is application 200061/HH, 37 Coggeshall Road, Earlscone. And we do have a statement on this application, which will be read by Alison. It's from Mr. Gary Neal, who is the applicant. Alison, thank you very much.
Yep.
Final one.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
We have taken advice from Braintree District Council and supplied new drawings which comply with the requirements set out by the Council. The Parish Council is objecting as members of this Council believe that the site is overdeveloped. They are also unhappy with the positioning of the carport to the front of the property. The Council recently granted permission for a large extension to number 35 Coggeshall Road, far larger than the extension we are proposing. Our property has ample room to the front for landscaping and parking, and there are many properties with carports on much smaller footprints along the Coggeshall Road. Further, the Parish Council is concerned about the impact on the street scene. Coggeshall Road is an eclectic mix of housing. There is very little uniformity. The road is a mix of modern and older properties of all shapes and sizes. Craigmore was built in the 1920s and is a mock Tudor property. The changes made to the appearance of the front of the property are exactly as requested by Braintree District Council and complement the existing building. Further, the Parish Council is concerned the extension will be used for private hire or holiday let. The extension is being built for our daughter and her partner to live in. She has lived in the annex for several years and pays a separate council tax. The extension will allow more space for her to live and raise a family. It will allow for a light, spacious first floor bedroom and a modern open plan kitchen. The annex is clearly linked to the main house, both on the outside and the inside. It would be impossible for it to be used for private hire or holiday let without impacting on the privacy of both those in the main house and the annex. They are not separate buildings. There has never been any intention to allow our property to be used in this way. There is every intention that we will live in this property as a family with the benefits that a multi-generational household can bring. We have supplied extensive professional plans of our property and the land around it. We have complied with the requested changes. We have supplied further photographs as requested. The annex is already there. The changes will only improve the building in need of a complete renovation. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you very much. There's no more statements this evening, and this is going to be presented by Chris Padgett. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bear with me just while I share my screen. I'll just do a short presentation on this one. So I'll just run you through the plans. One thing just to note, in terms of the description of development, the description on the slide there in front of you, we have slightly amended compared with what's specified in the report. It doesn't change what is actually proposed in this case, but it does refer to the enlarged annex, which is obviously referred to within the body of the report before you. The original description didn't include that, and we thought actually it just required an amendment. So that's been agreed by the applicant and agent in this case. But as I said, it doesn't actually change what's proposed. So if I just run through the plans for this one, so starting with the location plan, you can just make out the application site outlined in red. So it's a large property at the moment on a substantial plot, as referred to by the applicant. Moving on to the block plan, so you can see us a little bit closer. So again, it's a large existing property with actually set back from the road by quite some distance, and you can see the footprint of the existing dwelling in grey. Moving on to the existing floor plans. So again, you can see the existing part of the house to the side, along with the outshots to the rear. Existing first floor plan. So you get the impression of the scale, and the existing roof plan. And then the existing elevation. So I think it's a quite an attractive property at the moment, and certainly very prominent within the actual street scene with that large gabled feature and the large dormers at the front as well. And again, just the existing elevations. So in terms of the proposal, you'll see the area highlighted in red there on the actual plan. So the proposed ground floor in terms of the additions. So with the removal of the existing parts of the building, and the first floor plan that was referred to by the applicant, and you can see the connection through to the existing dwelling and the proposed roof plan. So, but more importantly, we have the carport as well at the front. There we go. So, open bay carport, traditional design and appearance. In terms of the elevations, so two-storey in form with the actual link, appropriately sized and positioned, subordinate to the host dwelling, and seeking to replicate the proportions of the main dwelling. Dormers ordinarily, I would probably say, would be overly large if you consider them in isolation, but taking account the existing building and actually the adjacent property as well, it seeks to mimic the appearance of the existing dwelling. And again, proposed elevations. Just a few photographs, so you can see the existing property, so you can see the outshots on the right hand side of that photograph that would be demolished. Again, you can see the size of the plot here, and a view over to the side, so you can see the adjacent property, and again the prominence of dormers within the street scene of that sort of size. So it's not considered by officers that this would appear out of keeping. So overall, the proposed extensions, alterations to the dwelling are considered acceptable, is recommended for approval here this evening, subject to the conditions, which includes the condition in relation to the annex accommodation. So happy to answer any questions, Madam Chairman.
Chris, thank you very much. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I know this property very well, driven past it any number of times. It is a really attractive property, in my opinion. I think there's plenty of room on site for this. There is a real mix of house types and designs all along Coggeshall Road, so I don't see that it's going to have an adverse impact on the street scene at all. I think it looks pretty nice, actually, so I'm happy to move officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor. Does that find a seconder before I move on?
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Councillor. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Mann?
Thank you very much. I would agree very much with the applicant's statement. I think he nailed pretty much all the parish council objections, and it meshed very well with what we had in the officer report and the presentation. So very happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does anyone else wish to add anything this evening? Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application, and I'm now going to call the vote. Councillor Abbott.
For.
For.
Councillor Bowers. For. Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, members. That application has been granted unanimously. And that brings us to the end of our planning applications this evening. I'd just like to thank you all for your patience and your attendance, and see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you. And I will close my part of the meeting at 22:51. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, before I ask the webcasting officer to terminate broadcast, I'd urge members to complete the short survey seeking your feedback on this meeting, which we'll email to you shortly. As you know, it's very important for us to get your feedback in order to improve our meetings. I'd also like to remind you that the Council retained performance data relating to your connections this evening. This is in the event of any legal challenge to the way the meeting's been held. Thank you very much for bearing with us this evening and attending, so good night. And please can the webcasting officer confirm that the YouTube broadcast has stopped?